Oi, there we are. Hey, don't check your 401k today unless you want to cry. Oh, God. Hi, everybody. It is the 3rd of April, 2025. My name is Luke Thomas. This is episode 248 of my live chat. Thank you so much for joining me. Let me scoot up a little bit here. Thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. Let's see. On the docket today, we have those UFC 316 announcements. We do have a UFC event this weekend that has a very good main event. Rest of the card, your mileage may vary. The PFL starts tonight. In fact, like just hours after this live chat is over, it will begin. It's a 10 p.m. East Coast main card start time on a Thursday. Who thought that was a good idea? Nobody smart. I can tell you that. Nobody smart. I mean, I want to give the PFL a chance this season because I do think they made some good changes to what they were doing previously. But your first event is a 10 p.m. East Coast start time on a Thursday. Okay. All right. I guess somebody didn't think that one through. I'll tell you that much. So a lot to get to today. A lot to get to. Thumbs up if you're watching here live. I appreciate that on YouTube. Be so kind if you would to subscribe. That helps a lot if you would do so. And you know how this works. I put up a thread in the posts section, used to be called the community section, but the posts section here at youtube.com/Luke Thomas. You guys fill it up, then vote on which questions you want me to answer. I go for about an hour on that. And then afterwards, we get to the paid portion where you can fire in a donation into the super chat, and then we'll put your question on the screen and then we'll answer it there. The one caveat to that is if you're a member of the channel, you don't have to do that. You can just get in there for free. If you have any issues about getting your stuff on the screen, please tag intrepid producer Othello. He'll help you out. Okay? All right. So, without further ado, you guys know how this works. Let's get this party started. Bang. All right. Welcome back. Welcome back. I don't know if I have any housekeeping notes today. I don't think so. So we can just get right into it. Let's get right into it. I'm probably missing something, but let's get into it. All right, here we go. Let me change the background. There we are. Change this to this. All right, let's go down here. See, okay, something's kind of interesting that's happening here where people are filling it up, but then they're waiting till like an hour ahead of time and they're firing in questions and then putting them in there, and it kind of messes with the algorithm a little bit. I'll let it go this time, but I don't know if people feel the same way I do. It's a little bit, it's gaming it a little bit. I would rather someone like put it in. I mean, it's not that you can't put it in an hour ahead of time. It's just that it ends up being, overly represented relative to, I think, other things that are sometimes a little bit more interesting. But okay, for now, let's do it this way. All right. Look, you often say it's least ideal for a champ to vacate the belt like GSP did at middleweight instead of unifying with Whitaker. But in the case of John versus Tom, I agree John retiring without fighting Tom would be worse for the company than John fighting Tom and passing the torch by losing to Tom. But I also feel that John retiring as champ and Tom being elevated and reigning as champ would be better for the company and for Tom than John beating Tom and then retiring, as Tom would likely regain the belt and beat all the other heavyweights, maybe even surpass the 3-title defense record. But we would still know that he was beaten. And to your point, John left 205 in shambles. And I feel if he beats Tom and then retires, it would leave heavyweight in a similar state. Whereas if John just retires without fighting Tom, UFC can use that to market Tom more than they could market Tom after losing to John, even if he regains the belt. But to be clear, I'm not advocating for this. Like yourself, it is still one of my biggest must-see matchups of 2025. Just pointing out there is a scenario where this ends up less ideal for UFC if John were to win dominantly and just retire. I mean, so a couple of responses to this. The answer is, would it be bad and potentially the worst of all scenarios available if John were to go in there and just hammer Tom out and win? Yes, that there is a world where that would be potentially the very worst case scenario you could get. That is conceivable. Like if he really was able to like dummy Tom, that would be quite bad. But I mean, you just have to ask yourself a very basic question. What is the job of the promoter here? The job of the promoter is to put on fights that people want to pay money to see. And I realize that they do that. Any promoter does that infrequently sometimes, but that's the job. Like, are we really advocating that because one of the scenarios, not an implausible one, but one of the scenarios leads to a outcome that is undesirable, therefore what? We don't make the fight? You make the fight. Like, that's just where we are with this. Like, I grant that you're courting a little bit of a problem territory if it ends up getting that way, but that's not a reason to not make the fight. And as long as we're not really arguing to not make the fight, then this is just a risk you have to run. And to me, it's worth running that risk because one, I find the notion that John could beat him totally plausible. I find the idea that it would dummy him harder to believe. I really don't believe that is true. I don't think UFC believes that. I definitely don't think that John believes that. I think John knows he's got the fight of his life on his hands, which is why there's been all this friction and obstacles that he has placed in the way to making it, which again, it still might happen, but it's not necessarily been the smoothest and easiest result to get. But noting that there are ways that this could go badly, unless you're arguing that we should just not make the fight, I don't know what to say to that. Like, yeah, it's true that things could go bad, but so what? Like, it's more important to make the fight and deal with that, to me, than to be like, well, a bad thing could happen, let's just not make the fight. It's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is I favor Tom to win. Your mileage could vary on that one, but I favor him to win. I think the UFC is kind of adamant about doing this in part because they also believe that Tom would win. Again, that is totally a speculation on my part. Obviously, I'm not a mind reader, or rather, I don't have the ability to tell the future. But there's sort of strong optimism for that reason. The last thing I'd say is, on top of that, I would say that yes, if Tom were to lose, that would not be great. But that to me would still, like, he's young enough to still make enough of a recovery where he's able to build off of that. I will tell you that to me, the difference is, unless Aspinall just gets dummied, the difference between him losing a competitive fight and then no fight happening at all, yes, there is a difference. I'm not suggesting to you that there's not, but it's not so steep that, again, it's a reason to just call the whole thing off. It's not like that disastrous. And I think, let me see if there's anything else here that you could still market him over time because of his youth, and I still think he has a ton of advantages over some of the other guys. Last thing I'd say is, again, I think if John wins, he would almost certainly never compete again. But, UFC would have a strong incentive to book a kind of rematch. In fact, I wonder if there's any part of the deal that you can always retire and they can't force a guy to compete. But, this is also a product of their own making, to be perfectly honest, right? I mean, they dealt with GSP in this very situation where they were like, okay, if he fights and beats Michael Bisping, he's going to then have to go unify or face Robert Whittaker, and then he just gives the belt back and says no. And they were like real pissed about that. And it's like, here you are finding yourself in this situation again. And it's like, this is a thing that could have been forced a lot earlier. This is a thing that a juncture that they didn't like. The Stipe Miocic fight, sorry to say to everybody, was a complete waste of time. It was a complete waste of time. I realized that they made some money on the event. I realized that John got a nice win in terms of the payday, and he looked dominant. And again, I don't think John looked bad at all, but he was fighting a fucking corpse that night. Like that. Well, that fight was signed before, and when he got injured, we had to go back and make it again. No, the fuck you didn't. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. There was absolutely no reason to make that fight. Oh, well, they promised to go to him before he got injured. They were, why change it now? This is why you do that. This is why you do that. You set it up a little bit earlier. And again, even then he could retire and call it off, but he's still looking for another payday. Force it earlier into the process, and the chances of this happening, I don't know if it substantially goes down, but it certainly mitigates some of the risk. Force it earlier. But now they've waited until like the very last minute, to make this dumb ass unnecessary Stipe Miocic fight. And now you're right to point out there are ways, certainly there are ways this could go bad, but it's like they're the ones who engineered all of this. You know, I'm not sure what to say about that. Like, that's their problem. Okay, let's see here. All right, if JDM wins, we're talking about UFC 315. Do you think we might get Islam versus JDM at 170? I think the chances are pretty, or I would say much higher in that case, obviously. Particularly if Shavkat's knee is really as bad as they say, you could still give him the title shot upon his return. Meanwhile, have Brady fight Bilal. Again, this is assuming JDM wins the title. So Brady can avenge his only loss before he himself gets a title shot versus the winner of Shavkat versus Islam JDM winner. And at 55, do Ilia versus Gaethje for the vacant 55 belt. I don't mind that. You could then do Arman versus the winner of Patty versus Chandler, Charles versus Max for the BMF, and Dustin versus Hooker for Dustin's retirement fight. Thoughts on the hypothetical? Dude, actually, I'll be honest. I actually like all of these calls. I don't know if these are exactly my number one way of like my preferred way of doing it, especially because part of what you're building into your argument is Shavkat's knee may not be ready. You know, we'll just kind of put that on the back burner, but we don't actually know how true that is. We don't really know. It could be true, certainly, but we don't exactly know. And so that could gum up the works a little bit. But the idea of like, if JDM wins, there's your chance to do Islam at 170, see how that goes. Brady takes on Bilal a little bit later. That winner could then jump up. Where did you leave Shavkat in all of this? You didn't really address where Shavkat is. So that's kind of like the hanging part of this that doesn't work. But to your point at 55, Ilia versus Gaethje is not like my favorite fight there. But in the scenario that you're positing, does that work? It certainly does. Also, remember, Ilia saying, like, they promised me a fight for the title. That would solve that problem. It wouldn't be the opponent necessarily that everyone had in mind, but it would certainly be for the title, which could count. You say Arman versus the winner of Patty Chandler. I love that fight. That idea in particular, because as I said before, I did not think Saryukian was ready for Islam the second time. I don't know that. I cannot prove that. We would have to see. But the available evidence that I have looked at tells me that Saryukian has certainly got a lot better, but has not surpassed Islam in skill. Again, stranger things have happened, but I think that he would have lost had they fought, and it puts him back in this kind of no man's land. And then you write Charles versus Max for the BMF. I mean, who the fuck is against that fight? Jesus, yes. That's all, by the way, a rematch, if folks recall, from 45. Dustin versus Hooker, which would again be the rematch. I love them all. I don't know if the UFC can engineer this, but in the scenario that you're positing, I think what you have mentioned here is awesome. These are great, great fights. Great fights. By the way, kind of interesting to note, I saw some consternation around UFC 316 and a lot of folks being like, you know, what they should have done is Pantoja taking on Merab, and like people are desperate for like a fight of greater significance than even what a normal weight class bout can offer, which kind of tells you, one, you've got Merab, he hasn't really cleaned out 135, but he's gotten pretty far along the way, and so there's no title challenger kind of sitting out there that folks are like dying to see him get at. You might say, well, I wanted to see the Jan rematch, but again, Jan already got blanked the last time they fought, and it's not a fresh challenge. So, like, there's not really, like, fresh challenge. I mean, just at 25, there are some fresh challenges. KKF is a fresh challenge. Cop is a potentially fresh challenge. But I can see why people feel that way. It's just the problem is you end up gumming up the works when you make these fights. You have to kind of really find the right moment. Islam is a special case because he has done a lot at 155 and is the number one pound-for-pound guy in the sport with a limited window left. In those scenarios, I think it makes a little more sense to, kind of push him to the front of the line and give him opportunities that you wouldn't necessarily get. But at the point I'm trying to raise is there is a massive appetite, not exactly for like, oh, we want more champ fights. I mean, that's partly what you're getting there, but a fight that is of greater significance than just what the weight class title against a top contender can confer. There seems to be, I wouldn't say fatigue, but less interest, just less interest for that currently anyway. Oh God. Once again, the text messages. All right. Ilia won and defended the belt at 45 has an exciting fighting style, and receives frequent mainstream attention in Spain. Why isn't he a pay-per-view draw? Do you think he'll ever do a Conor Ronda numbers in the future? This is not even the least bit surprising. Nothing about this is surprising. Nothing. Zero. Zip. Guys, it takes a while to become a pay-per-view star. A while. It doesn't happen very quickly. You might say I've seen cases where it did happen quickly. It happened pretty quickly for Ronda Rousey, generally speaking. Happened very quickly for Conor. But these are the exceptions that prove the rule. It took St. Pierre some time to become a big pay-per-view star. It took Anderson Silva a long-ass time to become a pay-per-view star, like a really long time. It wasn't until he was deep into his run where that really began to show up in a pretty consistent and extraordinary way. And now you're just living at a time where pay-per-view isn't even the same kind of automatic purchase that it once was as just a general consumer proposition. It just isn't the same, that it was when Anderson Silva was making his run. And he's only had 2 real big fights. He had the Volk fight, which took place in the United States, and then he had the Max fight, which was not in the United States. And I bring this all up to say, you have to go and do the rounds of local media. This is why fighting in New York City is important. It's the home of media in this country, essentially. So you can go and do major media outlets, and you can really begin to engage with the local press, who then write stories for their local audiences. And when you're doing this at a major media event with a major market, this has, a vast ability to then spread the word. You're doing this overseas, you're just missing all of that. So he's only headlined 1 pay-per-view in this country. Yeah, no shit, he's not a star. No shit. He's also not an American, which, of course, is not a limiting factor by itself. But in certain cases, anyway, it can cause it to take a little bit longer than normal. And he doesn't fight super frequently. He fought 2 times last year. That's not like a low amount, but it's not a high amount. Yeah, him not being a pay-per-view star, given all of those circumstances, is the least surprising thing. In fact, I'd be more surprised if he was. It takes time. You have to do it in this market. Again, there are exceptions here or there, but you, for the most part, have to do it in this market. You have to. He does speak the language, obviously, so that helps. But you have to engage with the press in this kind of a way. You have to do it, and you have to do it in front of a pay-per-view buying audience, and you have to do it pretty consistently over time against noted rivals. Now, granted, he had that in Volk and Max, but you have to keep upping the ante here. It takes time. It takes a long time. So the fact that he's headlined 1 pay-per-view in the United States, that is woefully insufficient to being a pay-per-view star. Woefully. Not enough. It's not going to happen. Dude, that wouldn't happen for Conor either. Imagine Conor headlined 2 pay-per-views and you'd be like, actually, let's look that up. Where was Conor 2 pay-per-views into his... Now, that's that's the fastest case I've ever seen, right? Brock's a little bit different because he was already a pay-per-view star in an adjacent industry. So the fact that he was able to sell when he came over to UFC is a fairly unique circumstance. But let's see Conor. Let's see him. Let me look here. Now, again, this is the fastest scenario I've ever seen, right? It's this is literally as quick as it can get in MMA. Jesus, this guy's rap sheet is half the fucking half the thing. All right, so his first card he headlines is the Brandao card in July of 2014. That was in Dublin. That was 3 fights in. 178 is where he fought Poirier. He didn't headline that. That was Demetrius Johnson's card. Then the Seaver event happened. Then the headline, the Chad Mendes card, that was already for a title. And what did that one sell? Again, this is a totally different time. It's 189. Where did that sell? 189. UFC 189 sold a shit ton, 825. Yeah, I mean, he's the exception that kind of proves the rule here. But okay, so for example, let's take the Anderson Silva one. It's a different era pay-per-view. I can look this up, but you get the idea. McGregor is going to make it look like it's so simple. Oh, by the time he was headlining his first pay-per-view role for an interim title, I think that was the interim title, right? Against Mendes, something like that. He was ready to just to cash in, but he is just so utterly unlike everything else. It takes time to do this kind of thing. I'm repeating myself. All right. Damn, McGregor's shot to stardom is like insane. I don't know if we'll see that again in our lifetime. That was crazy. All right. Assuming the UFC Netflix deal happens, how likely do you think it is Netflix pays what they're asking? With pay-per-views down, shallow divisions, and no big stars, I feel like UFC are in a tough spot negotiations-wise. Granted, UFC are still generating a lot in revenue. A lot of that is contracted, but surely Netflix will be looking to these factors to gain leverage. The latest reporting that I've seen, it's not my reporting, I'm only repeating what I'm hearing in other places, but my understanding is that I don't know how much of the inventory they're going to want. They're going to want part of it, and they're going to want those events to be special, and they're going to probably pay a good chunk of money for them, but it's going to be, dude, just this is I think the reality that we kind of have to accept. To the extent Netflix gets into the UFC business, could go a lot of ways, but my hunch is, and what the reporting kind of seems to indicate is, Netflix is looking at more of the premium side of the UFC experience. This idea that they just want any old UFC event, like, hey, we've got, Rick Rickerson versus Donkerson at UFC Apex, whatever the fuck, and we're just going to put that on Netflix. That doesn't appear to be where things are headed. Could they tailor out 4 pay-per-views or 6 pay-per-views a year and take those, and so there's still pay-per-views on ESPN Plus or something like that. They don't take the whole inventory. That could work. Could they take like the premium end? John Nash has brought this up. Like they could be looking for a UFC on Fox model. So for folks who may not remember, the Fox model was there were 4 shows, 1 per quarter, basically, on Fox, and it was a fight night, but there in many cases there was a title fight on the line. Like Nate Diaz fought Benson Henderson for the lightweight title on Fox. Demetrius Johnson headlined. There were 4 main card bouts typically on those Fox cards, and it was often that, or like a number 1 contenders bout or something along those lines. They might be looking for something like that, right? But they're not just buying the catalog, it appears. They're not just going to pay for all the pay-per-views, it appears. They want something tailored to the more premium end of it. But what that number ends up looking like, how many of them there are, it's hard to say. It seems very unlikely that they're just going to buy the inventory. They don't have use for it. They don't need it. Like they don't, what value is that to them? So I would be expecting something more along those lines than the other. All right, let's see here. All right, we're talking about UFC Kansas City here, right? Let me take a sip of this here drink. Okay, one more time. As awesome as Ian versus Carlos is, so we're talking about Ian Gary versus Carlos Praches, I can't help but feel like UFC may be killing off one of their possible future title contenders earlier than they need to. Not that the loser will never reach the level, but it could hinder their development unnecessarily when there are still so many other older welterweights that both could be fighting instead, such as Wonderboy, MVP, Luque spelled wrong, Colby, and Kamaru. I just don't really get the point of matching the 2 up-and-comers together, especially on short notice, especially it being a second short notice fight versus a fellow up-and-comer in the case of Ian. As I said on my reaction video, I mean, you could say a lot of things about Ian Gary. One of them better be that he doesn't duck smoke, bro. He just doesn't duck smoke. And that could end up costing him. Like, it's actually an interesting thing that he took the Shavkat fight on short notice, and now he's taking this fight on short notice. Are we witnessing a pattern of a guy not understanding risk management to the detriment of his own long-term prospects? We don't know the answer to that yet. He might go in there and blow the doors off of Praches, in which case this part of the conversation is proven to be irrelevant, but it's something to pay attention to. Like, how does he handle matchmaking? What does he say yes to? And is he doing that with enough prudence in how he manages his affairs? We shall see. In general, though, I don't really agree with the stated. I mean, I see a lot of people bringing up fights and then reasons to not do them. And then there are other fights you could make that are matter-of-factly much less interesting. I will tell you, Carlos Prates versus Wonderboy doesn't do a lot for me. Carlos Prates versus MVP is kind of interesting. Luque as well, I suppose. Colby to an extent. But in the case of Colby and Kamaru, they're not taking a short notice fight against Carlos Prates. Like, that's just not going to happen. They're going to take it on less than a month's notice to get ready for that guy. I'm sure that both of them are there's a decent chance that both of them were asked and just probably didn't want it or were injured or have other things going on. These are not guys late into their run that are just going to say yes to anything. They're going to kind of carefully more manage what they take on this sort of like twilight season of their career. So that part of it is one thing you have to always realize. And I've spoken to Sean Shelby about this before, which is, they'll try to make the fights that people are like, oh, I want to see X versus Y. That's the matchup. I don't want to see X versus Z. I want to see X versus Y. And they'll try. And then one of the two will just be like, yeah, I don't want to do it. So then they don't really have much of a choice. They have to then just move to the next fight. They can try and cajole some of these guys, but sometimes they're just injured. Sometimes they're not available. Like it literally won't work. And so you get to another place. Now I'm sympathetic to the idea that the UFC sometimes can end up cannibalizing their own roster, because rather than just, hey, we can't make the fight, we'll just delay it to another time. No, we gotta feed the beast. Short notice. These fights are happening under less than ideal circumstances. Maybe they even shouldn't be happening. If this were boxing, in many cases, they just wouldn't be. There's a plus and a minus to all of these, but to the point that you raise, sometimes you just end up chewing these guys up unnecessarily because you're just trying to meet these content demands. I'm totally on board with that idea, but I don't find any of those other bout permutations more interesting than this one. I fucking love it when these both of these guys are ranked, one more highly than the other, but they're ranked now. So you can kind of dust off the prospect thing. They're contenders now. They're contenders. I fucking love it when young contenders fight each other. It's some of the most exciting fights you can make in the sport. These guys are hungry. They have the most amount of durability in terms of physical punishment that they're ever going to have. These are huge stakes. As I mentioned before, Gary's giving a shot to a guy outside the top 10. I'm sorry. I think that's fucking awesome. Again, it's not without risk to some of the point that you raise, but I don't necessarily think it'll hugely derail either guy. Again, there's always a scenario where it could, but it's not present enough of a risk to not make the fight. So if we're just having a separate conversation about what this short notice call up culture that UFC has cultivated, is that a good thing? That's a conversation we can have, certainly, but that's not going away anytime soon. And I'm sorry, my personal opinion is Gary versus Prates fucking bangs, and they're both ranked now. They're both contenders now. Fucking make it. Yeah, I'm totally okay with it. In fact, I'm like, of all the fights on the calendar, of course, 314 has a bunch of them, but let's say non-title fights on the calendar, that's up there with my most anticipated. I can't wait to see that fight. So I think we have to the point, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the other component here is, are these guys going to be the best versions of themselves? So are we getting a lesser fight because of this call-up culture? That's another part we can have. But the point that you raise is almost independent of that, which is UFC may be killing off one of their possible future title contenders earlier than they need to. They don't need to make this fight. That's true. They don't need to make this fight, but I don't think they're killing them off. And this is an exciting matchup relative to the other ones available. And they're both ranked. I'm happy to not do this on short notice. If they wanted to call it off and say, let's just wait until it's ready to go, I'm okay with that. But given where we are and given how they operate, we kind of have to work within that. I'm okay with the fight. Could the fact that the Octagon and broadcast are filled with sponsors make piracy less of a concern for the UFC, since even streamers are viewing the ads? Perhaps in a small way, yes. Also, I'd love it if UNBC did some more MK Classic rewatches of historic MMA or boxing fights like during COVID, especially when the only thing is Apex slop. I called Apex slop on Twitter, and people got real mad at me for it. And I'm like, I wanted to tell the people who got mad at me for it, I'm like, do you think I'm the only person calling it that? Like, I'm only calling it that because I see a ton of other people calling it that. And also, it's not a comment necessarily on the fighters. It's to an extent it is, because there are just so many of them are almost borderline anonymous to even hardcore insiders. But it's more about the UFC's effort of creating an unnecessary tier of content that they don't need to do, that doesn't really further the UFC product other than to make more money off of creating a tier of overflow content and then, selling ads against it is essentially what's happening, or subscriptions against it. Like, yeah, I don't want them to do that. I want them to focus on the premium end of the product. That's what they're good at, or at least they should be good at, is the premium end. Okay, neither here nor there. Could the fact that the Octagon and the broadcast are filled with sponsors make piracy less of a concern? I will tell you that in an era where, ESPN subscriptions are flat, ESPN Plus, I should say, ESPN Plus subscriptions are flat, or actually, no, excuse me, not even flat, declining. That, yeah, it's probably good for the sponsors that they are going to get exposure no matter what, but that doesn't really solve the UFC's problems as it relates to ESPN Plus. Remember, that's why they were brought on board. Like, when the UFC went from, hey, you could buy our pay-per-views on DirecTV or whatever, to just 100% ESPN Plus, the aim was to boost those numbers as much as possible. And of course, ESPN Plus has been their own worst enemy in 8 gazillion ways. But beyond that, the point of that relationship was to boost that subscription service total, like that. They're trying to make that streaming service worth it. It's nice for the UFC to have a sponsorship thing going on, but if they can't meaningfully raise who's watching the product, and or that's limited by how many signups they can get to the product, and again, it's a more complicated question because of what role ESPN plays in their own demise here. Essentially, the fact that the sponsors are getting views no matter what, it's like, I guess if the sponsors are getting some kind of activation where they feel like they're getting their money's worth, whatever the UFC is charging them, then fine. But it's hard to quantify. Often it can be hard anyway to quantify illegal views and what those ultimately result in. And like, are there studies on the consumer behavior for advertisements shown during illegal streams? Like, I don't even know if there's even any, like, I don't even know what that would even be. So probably to some extent this is a mitigating circumstance, but I don't think it's a fundamentally, like, it doesn't, there's too many problems that piracy is still creating that doesn't really address. That's a weird comment. Look, I saw your Xtreme FC post, never saw you commentating and couldn't cringe more. JK. Okay. I thought it was pretty cool, but what was the whole experience like for you? Well, if you're a member of the YouTube channel, I made a video right after the event was over from my hotel room in Iowa City. It was fucking awesome. It was awesome. It was awesome. It was awesome. Iowa City was great. This is where the University of Iowa is. Awesome little downtown there near the university, like really cool. And I'm not even doing a bit. Like, it was actually quite nice. I was talking to Big E about it. Actually, it reminded me of like a bigger Fredericksburg, Virginia. For anybody who's ever been to Fredericksburg, Virginia, it's got kind of like a downtown where there's like tons of shops and restaurants and bars and all kinds of stuff. And it was like that, just much bigger, but it's had that same kind of like mid small city vibe, which was great. It was cool, very walkable, nice things to see, very pleasant people. Boy, I got to tell you, the Mexican food in Iowa is bullshit. Boy, they're pulling a fast one on those gringos. Wow. It was the worst Mexican food. And I went to 2 different places that were like highly rated. Wow, it was shit. It was really bad, really bad. So they're pulling a fast one on those gringos. But the people of Iowa were very friendly. It was real cheap out there. Oh my God. I got a ramen at some place that was near the hotel. It was half the price of what I pay here. I couldn't believe how cheap it was. And it was pretty tasty too. But in terms of XFC, they treated me great. It was an awesome opportunity. I hadn't called MMA. I obviously, I'd called some prelim action for Showtime on the boxing side, which I was lucky to do, and I'm very grateful for, and would do again if offered the opportunity. But that seems unlikely for the present set of circumstances. Obviously, BC was doing commentary for boxing before. He's better at it than I am, and he continues to do great things. So I'm happy for him. But I'm just saying, on personally speaking, but I feel like I can do MMA commentary halfway decent. It just had been a long time. It had been a long time. I hadn't done it in quite some time, so I was like crazy nervous heading into that. But then a funny thing happened. They made us call an amateur fight that never aired. They just wanted us to practice, and they could set the audio levels and everything, and that was not very long. And I actually was like, these amateur fights, don't blink, they're not going to last long. And I think it went like 30 seconds. It was like, in those amateur fights, man, a lot of times it's like the first hard shot that lands closes it. And you might be like, oh, that's true in pro MMA. And I'm like, no, not nearly the same. Like the first outrageous shot that lands in high level pro MMA might do that, but like a hard shot, no. I'm talking hard shots, not even big time powerful ones, just good hard clean shot. So that got us warmed up. And then the first fight I called that was broadcast for XFC was this guy Jaron Lathrop taking on Yevgeny Shinkarevsky. And Shinkarevsky is a flyweight out of Henry Cejudo's gym, Fight Ready. He was 2-0. He had a real decorated amateur background. Like, you watch him compete, and he's not like amazing at everything, but he's one of these amateurs that you could he was a 2-0 pro. But these guys you see it in boxing too, the guys who have amateur backgrounds, there's just a level of technical detail comprehensively where you can tell that they're not wet behind the ears. Like, there's still a long way for them to go to like really master everything, but they've got a lot of the bases covered for a lot of different elements, their movement, their distance, their understanding. And Shinkarevsky was like highly favored to win that one. And Lathrop lost his amateur debut, but had won 12 wins in a row in the amateur levels after that. So this was his pro debut. And I had seen the tape on him. You can hear me call it on the broadcast. He gets popped to the body a couple times, and he's like this. This was something that happened in one of his last amateur fights, and I noted it on the broadcast. So he was in a bit of a tough circumstance. Then he gets his kick caught, and then does the spinning back kick. Just unfucking believable for that to be a pro debut. So like the first fight that I called for them that went over the air went viral because of the knockout. Like it couldn't have started better. And then from there on out, there was a guy who fought for the UFC who was giving Said Nurmagomedov all he could handle. He did succumb to a guillotine in the end, but he's a real good fighter. Said Yakub Kakramanov, he went 2-1 in the UFC, and they just let him go. He's fucking good, bro. He was on that card. He had a good decision against a guy named Bruno Santos, who was a good fighter at a KSW, but a little bit limited. Anyway, I won't go through the whole card, but the point being is, the card itself just kind of built and built and built and built. And then Kenny the Boss Cross, nice guy, met his cornerman out of Syndicate, and some of the members of his circle. And dude, like, I mean, in the end, the main event ended up being a bit of a mismatch. But like, the funny part about it to me was the fight before this. Kenny Cross beat Emmanuel Sanchez, the Duke Rufus fighter, who was like the Bellator mainstay. He beat him. Like, he beat him in a 3-round contest. And it's like, dude, he should have got the call up then, and they didn't. So I think XFC was like, all right, we'll give him another one. They gave him this Brazilian guy he's Brazilian, but he lives in Argentina, Lucas Corbaji. And fucking Kenny smoked him in 14 seconds. Kenny Cross deserves to be in the UFC. Anyway, I have to tell you, that was one of the most fun nights I've had professionally in a couple of years. Like, it was awesome. Iowa City were great MMA fans. There were 3 guys from Iowa on the card, and they all won, so certainly that helped. But they were there early. They were loud. They were appreciative, and so was I. So if you watch that video, I talk more about it. But I can't wait to do the next one. I'm like thrilled about the opportunity and the prospect of it all. That was awesome. That was fucking awesome. So, definitely have some things to work on. I was a little rusty in certain parts, and people don't understand this, but it's really true. You have a certain role to play when different parts of the fight are happening. And what I mean by that is, so for example, if somebody gets hit with a big shot and they get rocked, if you're the color commentator, you can kind of react like, oh, but then you have to shut up and you have to let the play-by-play guy go. And especially if there's a finish that's happening, you have to kind of be quiet and let them, you have to do what's called lay out. You have to lay out and let them talk. That takes a little more practice than you might imagine because your emotions take over. You're like your instinct kind of takes over. And especially when I'm doing these watch-alongs where like I'm the only guy narrating and all you can see is me. You can't even see the fights themselves. It's the opposite of that. So it takes a little bit of practice to get some of those things right. But I loved it. I had a great time, and everyone in that organization treated me real well. So fun times. All right, with rumors of Umar versus Jan being targeted for 318, do you think the winner of that or the winner of Cory versus Figgy would be next for the title shot? Do you have a preference? Okay, good questions. Also, I noticed UFC acknowledged Patchy on the broadcast, which hopefully means they may be close to acquiring him. I did see that, or I did hear that, rather. Who would you like to see his debut against? Somebody in the top 5, if not top 3. I would like to see him versus Cejudo, but doubt Henry takes it. I also doubt he takes it. So the winner of Chito versus Bautista would be cool. I would go higher than that. I don't think you need to wait a whole lot of time. Okay. So you're asking who should get the title shot against the winner of Merab versus Sean? Should it be Figgy Cory or should it be Jan versus Umar? I'm going to say it depends on who wins Sean versus Merab. If Sean wins and Cory wins, I think you make that fight. If Merab wins and Figgy wins, you could maybe do that. If Umar wins and Sean wins, it's a different kind of, it's a fresh matchup. It's a different kind of question. I don't know how they want to go. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think at that point, if you're the UFC and Merab wins and you don't have to make a rematch, I think you could try to avoid it. If Sean wins, you have a few different directions you could go. And again, there might be a trilogy fight, although I suspect they'll move that along. But really just, I think they're going to look for the biggest matchup and then the fresh matchup, one that hasn't occurred before, if they can get to it. So, and also who has the strongest mandate? Like if Cory ekes one out, I don't know. But if Cory goes in there and like literally like one punch KOs him like he did, or one shot KOs him like he did, what's his name? Frankie Edgar. Like, again, that's unlikely, but if that were to happen, you just give it to him or whoever. So it's a combination of just kind of seeing what you're getting. Do I have a strong preference? My preference would be for a fresh matchup, whatever that ends up being, whether Sean or Merab wins, either way, just as long as it's fresh. Luke, this year I started reading fiction. All right. It's really a profound experience. Genre of fantasy is just magical. I have heard you saying many times that you don't read fiction. You realize that one should do it. So I guess my question is, why do you think it's hard for you or people in general who read nonfiction to read fiction? And do you think you are missing some benefits like imagination, empathy, etc. From it, in your opinion? There's no denying. There's simply no denying that like not reading fiction makes you miss something. To the point that you raise, the level of imagination. I mean, some of the most important works of any language are fiction, dude, like tales of fiction, the Brothers Karamazov, 100 Years of Solitude. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need I say Grapes of Wrath. Like, you can just go on. Boy, Grapes of Wrath might be more prescient given how things are going, but you get the point. Like, whether it's Steinbeck, whether it's, whoever, there's something to learn in fiction that nonfiction simply cannot teach you. I understand this. I'm just locked into a lot of bad habits. It's really as simple as that. I'm locked into bad habits. I end up buying a nonfiction book, and I bought the new, I haven't even cracked it yet, but I bought the new Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson Abundance book. I guess we'll see how that goes. And I open up one of those and like I get halfway through it and I can see another one that I want to get, and then like another one I want to get, and like another one. Like I just get locked into this pattern of believing that the best way to educate myself at this stage of my life is to read nonfiction. And again, that's a very helpful thing, but I don't even deny everything you're saying is true and real, and I should find a way to break out of it. But like, old habits die hard, man. It's hard to know where to start. I would have difficulty maintaining reading stamina for something like that. Like, That's not a reason to not do it. It just, when you've got short amount of time as an adult with kids or whatever, job, the whole bit, you kind of go to what you know a little bit. You kind of go to what you're comfortable with. And what I'm comfortable with is nonfiction. But I certainly grant that what you're saying is incontestably true. I'll answer this question. Luke, how are you doing mentally? I think better in general. I know you mentioned sleeping issues, which I have as well. That can affect your mood quite a bit. Yeah, no shit. A little hack I recently discovered was to take magnesium before bed. My friend, I take 150 milligrams of trazodone a night, right? Which is the max dose of a pharmaceutical grade. Well, it was originally used as an antidepressant. And what they found was that it just was not very effective at all at being an antidepressant. And they don't really use it for that at all anymore. But it turns out to be quite effective as a sleep medication. So I take that. That has helped. It's still a problem. We're just living. Don't you all feel like we're living in fucking weird and uncertain times? The media business is completely, I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. I could make this about many sectors beyond MMA media, but let's just take that for what it is. Like, dude, how can you work in MMA media or just to observe MMA media and not realize that the whole industry is in deep fucking trouble, man? Deep trouble. To say nothing of the fact that the UFC, under the auspices of Dana White, by his own admission, might sideline them for influencers. Even if they didn't do that, there's a number of other problems that are involved. But the future of getting your news from websites, and I realize that these websites have tentacles into other platforms, and that's a way they can maintain relevancy. But who is paying for the staff that is primarily selling ads against their websites? It's I'm not saying it's going to go away tomorrow, but you have to know that those days are numbered. They are numbered. They are fucking numbered. It is numbered, and that they won't go away altogether, but they will certainly shrink. And there's going to be bloodletting as a consequence. And then more to the point, the media members, or I should say people who are media figures, I'm not saying journalists, is a big difference, but media figures, the biggest names that have been produced or are being produced, for the most part, don't go to shows. Now, I know Nina has a big profile, but my understanding is she has a deal with UFC. This is a totally separate thing where she has all the access in the world, and she's able to generate a following, which none of which it's fine, it's whatever. But anybody else who has made a name in the last 5 to 10 years, they didn't do it going to shows. You know what I mean? Or very few of them anyway. Very few of them, because it's just not a lucrative way, relatively speaking, to generate an audience. You have to win on platforms. You have to win on IG. You have to win on YouTube. You have to win on Picket. That's where you have to win. And to do that, you don't necessarily, again, maybe access helps a little bit, certainly in certain cases, but that access comes with being muzzled, or at a bare minimum, strong pressure to be muzzled. That will go away. That's clearly not sustainable. It's clearly not sustainable. So that doesn't necessarily affect me per se, but it just creates an air of uncertainty that is, hard to deal with, to say nothing of the broader economic climate. I mean, where the fuck do we even start with that? Good Lord, what a mess. And again, we're just living in unstable times. I mean, I don't know where to, there's so many different places I could take this conversation. I don't want to alienate the audience, but suffice to say, it just feels very, very uncertain to me. It feels very and if you're raising kids now too, it's dude, I've told you guys before, how am I going to afford my daughter's college? And you're oh, well, you can worry about that in high school. Bitch, if you're not solving that problem now, you don't have a solution for it. It's too late. My daughter will be in first grade next year, so she'll be 6. So she graduates when she's 18. I'm going to save $500,000 in 12 years. How am I going to do that? Right? You see what I'm saying? You have to solve these problems as early as possible. And even then, how far can you get? Even then, what is that? How much is college going to cost by the time? I mean, it just, that's a small thing too. And then I've told you guys about everything else in one's life, and to say nothing of a series of small but real problems that one could have. So I'm definitely doing better. Certainly things have kind of settled. Like Substack has ended up being like a pretty good thing for me. I'm really excited about that. Obviously you guys here are tremendous. Like the really, this and MK, the backbone of what I do. I signed a deal in March for, another year with MK. So like, that's all great. But like, I have at least another 20 years of working before I think I'm retirement eligible, like planning all this out, dude. If you don't give this like real thought, how are you going to do this? And if you're a doctor and you're 45, you can just practice medicine for another 20 years. But I'm not a doctor. How do you practice media when it's constantly changing and you're getting older and there's younger people coming up? Like this is, and again, the broader climate is uncertain. I don't know if I sound neurotic. I'm sure to some extent that I do, but I think there's a lot of people, dude, who don't think about these problems with the kind of longitudinal vision that they're supposed to. And then the problems like smack them right in the face. And at that point, it's too late. It's too fucking late. I told you guys, man, like, I'm at the age where either my dad's been retired for some time, but like I've had friends whose parents are trying to retire. These are people who are not bad people. They're good people. And they didn't do poorly when they were in their 40s and 50s and 60s, but they didn't plan for retirement effectively. And dude, they have not stuck the landing. And, real problems emerge when this happens, bro. I'm watching it happen in real time. Again, I'm lucky that my dad is not in this particular case, but dude, I'm watching it with my friends' parents, and they're having to like pay for them, and then they're worried about how am I going to pay for college. Like it sounds like, oh, you're just thinking about things that are in the future, dude. If you don't get a handle on these problems now, they will eat you alive by the due date. You can't wait. And so a lot of that keeps me up at night. I'm not going to lie. A lot of that keeps me up at night. It's tough. So I will say this. Many of the things I was processing the last couple of years, I'm on the other side of that, which is great news. But, dude, we're in a weird fucking time, man. We're in a weird time. By the way, I didn't share this on social. Well, I did, sort of, halfway. Did you guys know I was on CNN yesterday morning? Pull this up here. Where is this? Here, let's pull. They wanted me on. Here. They wanted me on. There you go. There's your boy. That's Audie Cornish. So something interesting is happening. No one's asked me about this, but I just want to bring it up. Here, and you can see here too. This is my headline. Mainstream media is finally curious about the UFC MAGA connection. Something interesting is kind of happening now. Audie Cornish was ahead of the curve. She had Jorge Masvidal on her show in October. And it's actually, if you haven't seen the interview, it's actually a really good interview. She is not combative with him at all. She is not shitty to him at all. Shouts to Audie. She's a real nice person. And, what happened after the election was that a lot of, like, you saw Rolling Stone had a great piece, but, there was them, a bunch of different places like David Pakman and Crooked Media, like a bunch of like, mainstream and or left-wing media were like, hey, wait a second, what's up with this, like, this nexus between the right-wing world and then UFC, because obviously there is now an incontestable relationship between the two. And they were trying to do like a post-mortem on that. She, to her credit, observed it well in advance and kind of recognized that that's an underserved portion of the electorate, young men, that the UFC had tapped into and used for their purposes anyway, very effective ends. And anyway, she just wanted to have like I was on, I think I answered like 3 questions. I was on for like literally less than 5 minutes. Like, I think it's like 450 something. How long is it? How long is this video? Yeah, 451. Not very long. So there's not a whole lot to it in that sense. It's just the reality of morning television. But what's beginning to happen is that you're watching major mainstream, again, and or left-wing institute. When I say left-wing, I mean like expressly left-wing institutions begin to realize that that is a powerful nexus between these two worlds, and it's one to take seriously. But what it's also doing is it is crystallizing in the minds of people who are not of that political persuasion that the UFC could be potentially hostile to their interests. I'm not saying that's the case with Audie Cornish, but in other cases it can be true. And again, I don't think that's really going to affect at all the UFC's business in this next deal. I think whatever they're going to get from Netflix, like whatever that number is, to the extent that it's low, and it probably won't be, but to the extent that it is, will only be a function of like, declining performance on ESPN as a function of like, that whole relationship. But it's the deal. It's not that deal that I have any kind of like, how's this going to go? It's the deal after that. The deal after that is the one where I'm like, okay, that's where it's going to get interesting, because if TKO is just going to implement this kind of like basically a similar kind of strategy, which that's already dealing, fomenting a fair degree of dissatisfaction in the fan base, and now you're adding this like clear politically partisan valence that's like, and I know Dana told in the New Yorker, like, I'm done with this, but like, then you're greeting the Tates at Power Slap, like you're like, bro, the damage is done. Like it's all baked in at this point. The ideological top-down homogenization has already taken place. You can't undo that. It's just already fucking done. I wonder what the cost of that long term will be. We shall see. Don't know. I don't know how to answer that. We shall see. We shall see. All right. This person writes, I attended UFC London, this last one I'm assuming, and the energy was so flat. The card was lackluster. However, the tickets were extremely expensive. A few years ago, I paid £85 for decent mid-tier seats. Now they cost £200. Do you think these significant ticket price increases are pricing out diehard passionate fans that know all the fighters and cheer? Instead, higher ticket prices are being purchased more by tourist fans who are there to take pictures for Instagram and don't necessarily know the fighters and therefore don't produce the same energy. Also, why do we celebrate or congratulate Dana UFC for breaking gate records? Surely it just means fans overpaying, yet we are conditioned to think when the UFC breaks a gate record, it's an amazing outcome. Well, understand something. When the UFC was breaking gate records in a different era, like, post UFC 100 or something, that actually was kind of important because they weren't necessarily gouging people at that time. And, that MMA could pull some of these numbers by itself was kind of like a minor miracle, right? Like a UFC event at, what State Farm Arena or whatever. Wow, this can pull this kind. They can sell out and they can pull this kind of a number. This little sport really deserves to be taken seriously. And I think a lot of that instinct is still what drives some of their like, hey, look how great our numbers are. I'm only going to say this like slightly in defense of UFC, which is, I don't know if you guys are buying tickets to live events these days anyway, but, and I don't know how it is in London or the United Kingdom or whatever, or Europe more broadly, but here in the United States, everything is fucking expensive. Everything. Dude, my wife got tickets to see Shakira, right? She's going to take Tukster. I think it's at Nats Park. These seats are nubs. They're not good. Like they're I was making fun of her looking at how bad they are. They're $300 a piece and they're terrible. I think they're in like the 400 section. Like they're like objectively shit and they're $300 a piece. And if you wanted one on the mid-tier bowl, they're now like, and again, this is also on the secondary market, but even at the time they were like nearly $700 or $800. Now they're up to $1,000 each. Like, because I was like, we should upgrade this. Like, this is shitty. And she's like, go look at the prices. And I looked at them, and they were like $1,000 each for like the mid-tier bowl. I was like, holy fucking shit, dude. Ticket prices for concerts, ticket prices for like these, these touring shows, which to an extent, obviously, the UFC is. They're out of control. So like, I'm not defending the practice, but the notion that it's just UFC doing it is absolutely not true. It is so not true. It's a big problem with the ticket purchasing experience. Now, I know that you can buy tickets. A buddy of mine got me tickets to go see the Nats next week. They're playing the Dodgers. I'm supposed to go to one of those games, and we got a cheaper seat there or whatever. Like, but that's different. Like, there's 170 plus games a year that the Nats or any Major League Baseball team plays. Then they've got a big ass stadium. They're not going to sell all those out anyway. But Shakira is going to be one day in DC. you either get those tickets or she's gone. For those, or UFC's coming to London, whatever. If you don't get those, dude, they're just they're gone. They're out of there. Though any kind of scenario like that, the tickets are fucking outrageous. My response is, I think that fans are just paying this kind of stuff. Are there some people who are like tourism fans to the point that you raise? Certainly in places like Las Vegas or Miami or New York, that's definitely true. I would guess to some extent that's going to be true in London as well, which is obviously like a major metropolitan area. But I think it's a lot of fans actually just paying for it, like your scenario that you make yourself. And if hardcore fans or regular UFC fans are just willing to pay these ticket prices, and the UFC keeps doing record gates, like what lesson are they learning? They're learning that y'all will just pay. Y'all will just pay. So I don't know what to say. Like, it's like, oh, the tickets are too much. They're only too much if you won't pay for them. That's the only demarcation line that actually says they're too much. If people just keep buying them, what is the evidence that they're too, like, make the argument that they're too high if they keep selling out and doing gate records? What's the argument? Oh, people, there's angry fan sentiment about it. Okay, but in the real world, what's the evidence? There's nothing. It doesn't exist. So either buy the tickets or don't. My recommendation, listen, spend your money how you want to spend your money. If I lived in London, I would not pay $300 for bad seats for a UFC event. That's my personal opinion. Now, if someone got me a ticket, I would go. That'd be great. But if I had $300 to spend, let's say for 2 people, I'm going to go to fucking Cage Warriors. That's what I'm doing. Quality show, much more affordable price, I'm sure. That you get much more bang for your buck doing that. That's what I would do. Okay. This is a terrible question, I'm sorry to say. Look, I've always been surprised how fervently you believe the notion that the UFC's disclosed payouts are the true and final payments that the athletes, particularly the higher end ones, leave with. I cannot fucking believe we're doing this again. All right, I'll play ball. Yes, the UFC has submitted court docs disclosing certain amounts. Guys, if you're not familiar with what they have submitted, why do you have strong opinions about it? Do you think that they just dropped, oh, this purse here, that purse there? Do you think that's what's happened? Yes, the UFC has submitted court docs disclosing certain amounts, but I guess I'm surprised that you're so certain that whatever was disclosed is the 100% true and accurate accounting. Not to fully side with BC's theory of the big brown bag of cash, but if you listen to Josh Thompson's Weighing In podcast or DC's or Askren's podcast or even Schaub's, they have all said at various different points that the disclosed payouts are only a holy fucking shit. Okay. All right, guys. All right. Guys. We're talking 2 different things. Okay. When they're talking, Schaub's, and shouts to Schaub, I love Schaub, but shouts to, and DC too. And ask, I don't have any problem with those guys. But what you're misunderstanding, what they're talking about when they say, oh, my disclosed payout was X, but in the back room or at a later time, they gave me a bigger other number. They're telling the truth, but understand what they're talking about. What they're talking about are, if they go to California, let's make up a scenario. If they go to California, California will release those purse figures to the public. This used to be something that all the commissions did. And then the UFC went state by state and tried to get as many of them overturned as possible. They were very successful in doing that, in particular in places like Florida and in places like Nevada. Florida and Nevada used to share purse details, and then the UFC lobbied them to change it, and now they don't. So understand something that, like, what's happening there. Like, oh, we're just, hey, look at our awesome gate receipts. Oh, how much do you pay our athletes? Oh, that's secret. Like, okay, all right. I mean, if they want to brag about things, they'll brag about them. But if they don't, then you should kind of inventory about what might be the incentive in place that makes them not want to do that. But yeah, guys, it's been well understood since I started covering MMA that those were not the full or accurate numbers. Now, in certain cases, they can be full and accurate. It's not to say that they aren't, but certainly the higher up you go on the card, especially if you're on pay-per-view, especially in a different era of pay-per-view, you might see Daniel Cormier's purse as something like, 200,000, 300,000. And you're saying to yourself, oh, he's only getting 300,000. No, he would get pay-per-view buys on the back end. And so his pay might go up, or he might get a bonus. That might all go up. Guys, that is absolutely totally different from the information that they gave the courts. What they gave the courts is a complete and full accounting of what they have paid. Now, in certain cases, it's not an itemized receipt, like, hey, we gave Ronda, this much on this date, but there's any number of different factors we can go to, which was total athlete payout in the course of a year. Right? Total athlete pay. We know exactly how much they paid. We know, by the way, in certain cases, month to month or event to event, what was the payout for this event? What was the payout for this event? But total outlay during the year, as well as, and I cannot overstate this, internal documents that you could only get from a court subpoena that show that the entire strategy and plan is to maintain athlete compensation no higher than 20% on any given year now and going forward in perpetuity. There also, of course, were, any number of other documents related to, there were some individual, purse documents or contracts that were included, or, you name it. There was some of that ancillary pieces of evidence, but they know exactly how much the athletes got paid year over year over year over year. They know it exactly. They know it exactly. And of course, making that number as big as possible would only actually help the UFC's case. So they would have zero incentive to make that number smaller, to say nothing of the fact that they would risk being in contempt of court, which could have a cascading series of problems for any future ability to have a deal approved. Saying, God only knows what would happen to their lawyers in that particular case. Like, they have no incentive at that point under the court subpoena rules to shield information in discovery. All of that was turned in. That is not the same thing as the promoter before each event, UFC 300. Hey, here is the sheet of payouts. Those payouts are often incomplete. Yes, that is not the information that they gave to the courts. Guys, I cannot overstate this to you. I don't even care about this issue anymore. I did an interview last night with someone who was asking about this, because, I give the credit to the fighters who stood up and did the class action lawsuit and actually did something meaningful. Shouts to them. They had skin in the game, and they stuck their necks out there for not just themselves, but for the broader class of fighters that they represented. For them, I have an enormous amount of respect, right? And I'm not even hating on the other ones, but the vast majority of the other ones have never given a fuck about improving their own situation, have never appreciated MMA media going to the mat to promote their getting better pay. And in fact, in certain cases, aside from being indifferent, they were outright fucking hostile to it. I mean, I've had the number of videos I could find of people being like, why, from fighters being mad at MMA media for talking about this, versus on the other side, like being thankful, is got to be 100 to 1. And of course, you don't do it because you want them to be thankful, but it's just very surprising that they're often hostile to it. They've had multiple opportunities to unionize. They've had multiple opportunities to do fucking anything. And again, with the exception of the ones behind the class action lawsuit, they have chosen over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to do fuck all about it, and on occasion complain. I'm happy to drop this issue. I don't give a fuck anymore. If they don't want to make money and they don't care about help, then why the fuck should I? And I mean that with absolute total sincerity. And as I've said before, me covering that issue has led to any number of problems to my professional prospects from doing it. So believe me, I am all too happy to drop the issue. But there is no fucking debate. There is no debate. I'm going to say that as clearly as I possibly can. There's no debate. We know what they make, or at least certainly for that period anyway, and to an extent beyond, but certainly for the period in which they complied with the court's demands. We know what they make. We know what the UFC's plans are. We understand all of it. They're underpaid. It's not a debate anymore. The only response you can have is, do you care? Do you not care? Why is it this way versus why is it not this way? Like, being curious about the mechanics of it. But this claim that like, oh, what's actually happening behind the scenes, there's this vast, fucking Scrooge McDuck vault of gold coins that they're all swimming in, just not telling us about it, is absolute total fucking fiction. We know the truth. There is no other place to take this debate. It is over. People might try and resurrect it because they don't know what the fuck they are talking about. It is over. The fighter paid debate is completely fucking over. You can just decide how you want to feel about the results of it. But you don't get, and I'm not saying you are doing that, you're asking a question, but for the folks out there who still might be on the edge, there's no argument anymore. I lived through a world where we weren't exactly sure, there are other ways to look at it. What about that? It's over. It's over. Completely, thoroughly cooked, finished, over. They're underpaid. They're not just underpaid, they're severely underpaid. The UFC is not just maybe a monopoly, it's a monopoly or monopsony by any definition any working economist uses. Period. That's the reality. So do with that what you want, but that's the reality. There is no other alternative. And the people who are like, well, what about this behind the scenes? What about that behind the scenes? Not one of those people has engaged with what actually came out of that court case. They don't know. So they're still just living in this world of like, oh, we have as much information about this as we did in 2012. No, the fuck we don't. We have overwhelming evidence. It is not ambiguous. It is not up for debate. It is not unclear. It is as clear as it could possibly be. But as I said, the thing that blows my fucking mind is that even with all of that, you still have fighters hostile to media for advocating on their behalf. Well, if they would like to be underpaid, who am I to get in the way? All right. With that in mind, let's go to what you have, speaking of the pay, to the paid questions. Again, if you're a member and you have any issue, tag Othello. Okay? All right. Joe says, will we see a 2008 style recession due to tariffs? Polymarket had a recession at 50-50 today. I don't know where it stands at the moment. I would be surprised if we don't. Totally unnecessary, easily avoidable, just wrecking the place because the guy in charge doesn't understand economics 101. I mean, I know that sounds aggressive and unfair and, oh, he's got TDS again. The people who have TDS are the people who cannot see this for what it is. But, there's simply no way to convince people this brainwashed about how bad it is until it gets bad. So I guess we got to wait. Francisco says, makes sense to have Islam versus Oliveira and Topuria versus Arman. I don't agree. Oliveira was already set to fight Islam before pulling out due to injury. Don't care. Makhachev believes Ilia needs to earn his shot, and Arman does too. I don't want to see that fight. I want to see Arman versus, well, there's a few other ones I could see, but I don't have any desire to see Islam versus Oliveira too. Not right now, anyway. Luke, I've sent an updated Excel file a couple of days ago containing stats for average strikers, knockdowns, takedowns, landed and absorbed for under and over 35. I hope you're taking care. I did see it. I'm glad you sent it. I will have a look. You know what? We'll talk. Othello, send me a screenshot about this so we can talk about it on next week's live chat, please. Jules says, thoughts on techno-feudalism. Are we there? So this comes from the, who is this guy? He's the former finance minister of Greece. Starts with a V. What the fuck's his name? What the fuck is his name? It is Yanis Varoufakis. He has written about this, that essentially like what comes after capitalism is this version where, you know, the tech oligarchs essentially take over and have their own kind of feudal system of not governance per se, but economic domination. But I've not read the book, so I cannot say. It's an interesting theory, certainly, but I've not read the book, so I don't know. Samoa Joe, who I'm sure that's really not him, ignoring the early prelims, is 314 a low-key 9 out of 10 card. It's an excellent, excellent, excellent card. I probably would go so far as to say 9 out of 10, yes. Luke, if you could witness any historical event firsthand, which one would it be? None of them. None of them. Guys, I witnessed historical events firsthand. I was in my dorm room when 9/11 happened. I watched the towers fall on my fucking TV. 0 out of 10. Do not recommend. I was working at a security job when we invaded Iraq. I remember that on the news distinctly. 0 out of 10. Do not recommend. We all lived through the pandemic. 0 out of 10. Would not recommend. Every time I had lived through an historical event, it's been real bad. It's been real bad. You know what I mean? Like, I would like to live through my own event of like winning the lottery. You know, oh, that'd be awesome. That'd be sick. But like historical event, dude, get me the fuck away from that. I can't wait to be bored. I can't wait to be bored again. But like nothing's happening. Hey, what's happening? I don't know. Bars open, beaches nice, weather's cool, sweet. Take me there. I've lived through historical events and shit doesn't get better afterwards. You know what I'm saying? No thanks. How do all of these go in their prime? BJ versus Islam. We kind of went over this one. Probably Islam because he just has a more advanced skill set, but that's actually a much more competitive fight than you might imagine. BJ versus Volk. I'll take BJ. Cain versus Fedor. Probably Cain, if for no other reason than Fedor is oh, nice. So I'll say this. I won't tell you which one it is until it. God damn it! I won't tell you which one it is until it actually happens. But a big time TV show reached out to me to do an interview, and this is their producer. So once it's booked, like once it happens, I'll tell you about it. But and they want to do it next week. Next week. So there you have it. But okay. Last one on this. BJ versus Volk, I'll take BJ. And then Cain, Fedor, I'll take Cain. Fedor was easy to cut and wasn't the best wrestler. He did have mobile hips underneath, but I think Cain probably gets that done. Eric out here gifting memberships. Thank you, sir. Run them cheeks. Luke, in your opinion, what is the most overrated tourist attraction you've been to in the U.S.? Ooh, that's a good question. Man, overrated American tourist attraction. I know some folks might say DC. Your mileage might vary on that one. It's not for me, obviously, but I could see some people being, it's like, oh, it's just monuments and, you know, museums. Like, how great is that? Well, overrated tourist attraction in the U.S. I'll say, I'm trying to think that one through. That's a tough one. Because I think all of them all the ones I've been to have been at least had some redeeming value. I'll say, man, I mean, that's a good, you know what? That's a great question. Oh, you know what? I did the Paul Revere trail in Boston. That was kind of nubs. You can take the path that Paul Revere apparently took, you know, like, oh, the British are coming, all that shit. But it wasn't, you know, it wasn't that interesting. It was, yeah, it was whatever. Colby, is Steve Urseg the new Darren Till? No. Both got rushed to a title shot, lost it, and got finished in their next fight. The UFC ruined Urseg. He didn't look bad to me. And you might be like, oh, well, Till didn't look bad. But Till was also... let's see. I didn't think Urseg looked bad, but I certainly recognize that was a suboptimal way of matchmaking him. And that is definitely going to have some kind of a cost. But I am a little bit less convinced he hits a fall off akin to Till. I think Till had bigger issues than Urseg did. Also, Till was like, I'm going to be the best fighter in the world. And Urseg's like, you know, I work at the Genius Bar. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't have that kind of, he has like real humility. That there's a difference there. Miguel says, Luke, any advice on how to deal with a breakup? Well, it depends. My girlfriend of 7 years and I broke up 2 days ago. Well, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear that, but not having heard the circumstances, I don't know what to tell you. The reality you have to understand is like, there's always going to be there's going to be two different sets of rules you have to obey. One is the one I always tell you about, the basic set of rules, that pain from breakups is not any kind of loss, which you know, the loss of romantic love is a real one. You know, your plans get upended, and who am I going to be now? And like, all my friend circle is going to be different. Like, or, you know, a big portion of it, like, especially if you were together 7 years, like, these are disruptive life events, you know. And it's the same thing I would always say. You still have to maintain a routine. You still need to exercise. You still need to, you know, don't drink it away, your problems, like, go talk to someone about it. All of that is in play. But like, the second set of rules you have to obey is, well, okay, why did you break up? And the more important question is, what is your contribution to that? And what does that say about you? Now, I want to be clear. I'm not putting the blame on you. In fact, there could be cases where somebody is truly a victim of someone else's malfeasance. But in general, if there is a breakup, particularly after 7 years, that means there was a real big discrepancy over time and vision for the future. Why did that emerge? And how did that emerge? And what lessons can you take from that? Because the reality is, if you don't learn those lessons, your chance of finding lasting romantic love subsequent to that is going to be diminished. JP says, how does Sean O'Malley saying that he hasn't waxed his carrot at all in 2025 factor into the rematch? I don't think it makes a difference, other than to say, if he believes it will help him, then it probably has some kind of, you know, placebo effect in the end, right? And it seems to be part of a broader trend. He's not doing that. He apparently quit smoking weed. He's not gaming. He got off social media. He's looking to like cleanse himself. And again, I don't think that, you know, not jacking off, I don't know exactly how much that's really going to help. But if it's part of a broader effort for him to center himself, to give himself the best opportunity possible to win, and he believes that, it might. Caleb's, okay, look at this last name. I'm not even reading this fucking question. Get the fuck out of here. Brendan says, have you read or heard Ezra? Here we go. Yes, I bought the book. I haven't read a single chapter yet. I'm not even going to front. Is this merely a rebranding of neoliberalism? So I haven't read the book. I've read reviews of the book. The biggest critique that I have seen is that the best critique I have seen, or at least the most interesting one anyway, is that here's the argument he's trying to make. If you look at like China's Belt and Road Initiative, in like the last 20 years, they've built high-speed rail everywhere. In fact, like China's capacity for industrial manufacturing and industrial capabilities more generally is so vast that they can keep building stuff in China, and they are, but some of that is actually becoming unnecessary and redundant. So they're just trying to ship it elsewhere. Because they have such capacity for it that they're again, depending on the industry, particularly the real estate one, in certain ways they're actually kind of saturated to an extent in China. So they're trying to take it to Africa or other developing economies in Latin America, or you name it, like anywhere anyone's willing to get it, they'll take it. It's called the Belt and Road Initiative. And look at the question here again. Anyway, and so if you just look at various programs that, obviously major cities and are run by almost exclusively Democrats, and in many of these, it's not just exclusive to blue cities, by the way, or blue states, but this is one of the places where the problem can begin more noticeably. Trying to get high-speed rail between LA and San Jose has been an absolute disaster, and every time the attempts to finish it continue, the costs go up, and they have to deal with this environmental regulation, and then this group gets to weigh in on it, and it just takes longer and longer and longer. And I've told you guys about this Peruvian economist named Hernando de Soto. Hernando de Soto has argued an interesting metric for the health of an economy's free market vibrance is from the minute that someone puts in a permit to open a business, how long before that business is open. And in certain countries it takes years to do that. In other places it takes 6 months or less. It's very, very fast. And the point that I having not read the book, but having read about it and seen some interviews and whatnot, the point they're trying to argue is if the left wants to reclaim any part of what they want to argue in the book is that Donald Trump has a vision of scarcity. There's not enough to go around, so we have to get rid of immigrants. There's not enough to go around, so we have to ration it for preferred groups. It's a scarcity mindset. And what they're trying to argue is that we need to have an abundance mindset. And part of that is reducing regulations to lean into industrial capability, to an extent manufacturing, but building things again, building tunnels. The Big Dig is sort of a great, an example of a thing that just took forever and was very, very long and blah, blah, blah. This high-speed rail in California is yet another one. And liberals have been the first to be like, well, we want more affordable housing, just not in our backyard. It's an embrace of YIMBYism. And so to an extent, is that also an embrace of neoliberalism? The bigger question is, how much of what they're doing is just deregulation versus that comes at the expense of potentially, vulnerable populations and workers in general, versus something like what FDR did, like the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is a government investment that has a clear social utility and is kind of like part of the abundance agenda, but is not anti-worker inherently. And so there's a conflict over that. But I've not read the book, so I don't know how true any of this shit is. So there you go. Morning Wombat says, what are your initial thoughts on the Rodriguez versus Pitbull and Krylov versus Reyes matchups at 314? Feel like these are both examples of good matchmaking. Rodriguez versus Pitbull, I might have gone a different direction. I would have gone Pitbull versus Aldo, but I don't hate it at all. You got literally the best fighter in Bellator history taking on an exciting top contender. There's literally not a damn thing wrong with that. It's great. And then the other one was Reyes versus Krylov. Yeah, it's kind of like for Reyes, he's built a bit of a comeback, but it's against subpar competition. And against Krylov, he's shown flashes of brilliance, but has kind of fallen short. So how's this going to go? I agree. I like both of those matchups. Maybe other people feel differently, but that's kind of where my head is at. This gentleman writes, Luke, my father, who has been absent all my life, I'm 28, has recently come into contact with me and would like to go to dinner. Any advice or insight? Again, people ask these questions with hardly any information for me to go on. My inclination would be to say you should do it, but I don't know the circumstances of why he was gone, what he wants out of his present moment. Is he worthy of your time? Is it not? Have you moved on? Have you not? These are difficult questions for me to answer. I think in general, it's always better to have relationships with family members when you can, particularly one as pivotal as that. But yeah. Ant writes, how big was that L you took on Twitter this morning? L? From you, bitch? Please. Where is that fucking stupid ass tweet he wrote? Hold on. Let's see if I can find this thing. Where is this thing? All right, hold on. Where the fuck is this? Now I got to find this thing so I can react to it. It is... Sorry. Okay, here we go. Let me show you Ant's take, and then you guys can take a look. Let's read it together. So, hold on. Let me set the context here. So, if you guys didn't see it, Sean O'Connell, who is I like Sean O'Connell a lot, commentator for PFL, was making the argument. He was not being whiny about it at all. He was trying to make the argument that, look, I can realize that you can go online and any fan base can be super upset and pissed off all the time and like shitty and negative, and that's true about people towards UFC, towards boxing. But he was kind of making the argument that, like, you know, these people at the PFL are trying hard, and some of the negativity just seems a little bit out of bounds, like they don't even want PFL to succeed. And I'd have a couple responses to this. First response is like, well, first of all, they don't, like, nobody owes PFL anything. Like, you have to win the fans over, which PFL has to look in the mirror, and I would argue they're very good at winning investors over. I don't know if they've made any effort to win fans over. And so if the fans aren't on your side, it's not a problem that Sean O'Connell has. I'm not directing it at him, but I'm just saying more generally, the PFL, like, all of their focus is on treating their organization as a financial instrument. It's not about winning fans over whatsoever. So that's the first thing I'd say. But the other point that I raised here, maybe I can show this one. Yes, here's the one that I wrote. So here's what I wrote. Oh, fuck's sake. Hold on. God damn it. I'll read it to you. What I wrote was, I'm sympathetic to this. I'm kind of sympathetic to this. Halfway, anyway. Every perceived UFC competitor is treated harshly, sometimes to the point of absurdity. Strikeforce, Bellator were the same. PFL also made good changes recently, but there are deep problems with the product, and leadership only doubles down on them. And then I wrote, look, let's see how this goes. There is reason for optimism. Some of the changes should bear interesting fruit, but being hostile to media, trying to cover them, or keeping elite fighters inactive, or sticking to a useless tourney format, etc., will do nothing to staunch the bleeding. So after that, Ant had this to say. Let me see if I can get this the right way. Let's try it this way. Yes, that worked. Okay. Right? Yes. Okay. All right. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I'll read it to you very quickly. A rare bad take from me. He writes, every challenger brand to UFC, so Elite XC, Strike. Look at him saying Strike Farce. Dude, Strike Force was a good promotion. Fuck off with that. Okay, Bellator and PFL is automatically given coverage and respect by MMA media as if it is their birthright. I mean, I couldn't possibly tell you how untrue that is. If anything, it's a struggle to get them to cover it. I know it doesn't seem that way from the outside, but I think this is Ant's, not UFC bias per se, but Ant had a certain relationship to UFC when he worked there, where I think that was a prevailing kind of thought, which is just absolutely not the case. Having worked in these media institutions, I can tell you that, like, nobody wanted to cover Bellator when I was there. And Strikeforce was like, do we really want to spend money covering this? The idea that, like, they went out of their way to do it because, oh my God, we think that they're just as good as UFC is just total, complete, absolute fiction. First, all right. At UFC, Joe Silva called it the second law of Lindland. So he's referring to Matt Lindland. The first being every decent fighter outside the UFC is automatically assumed to be, at worst, the second best fighter. Just because they are a good fighter outside the UFC, they got that massive unearned respect. Here's another thing I would say. There have been cases where guys were overestimated to be better than they were, but there's been cases where they were underestimated and they were much better than we actually understood them to be. Matt Lindland was an Olympic silver medalist, in part by Fiat, but an Olympic silver medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling. And he had, he got waxed by David Terrell. We should be very clear about that. But, he also he was giving Fedor a bit of a problem until Fedor held the ropes. But let's continue just for a second. The second law of Lindland is that any promotion not named UFC that has a good fighter or two and a TV deal must be treated as if it is a challenger to the UFC. Well, those organizations kind of presented themselves as a challengers to the UFC, and not all of them. Coker was somewhat demure about that in certain cases, but, like, there might have been something at early stages of an overestimating of, like, what was really possible that they could achieve. But what did you write here exactly? A TV deal must be treated as if it is a challenger to the UFC. Anybody who was in charge of any of the websites and any of the places I ever worked never thought it was a clear challenger to UFC. There were weekends where they could compete. There were certain bouts where they could compete. There were certain events where they could compete. It was a little bit more, there was more parity, but everyone kind of knew what the 800-pound gorilla in the room was. I would love to see what the specific evidence for this would be. It could be recency bias on my part, but PFL enjoyed more Lindland's law than any other org. The breathless reporting of them signing Jake Paul. Okay, I'll agree to that part. Think back, how many in MMA media told the truth about the Francis deal, that it made zero business sense to sign a guy who can't crack $300K for the UFC for $1 gazillion. I don't think them signing a top free agent was a bad deal. Now, again, to the extent that he only fought one time for them, the contours on that deal might have made a little bit more sense have they been narrower, but they wouldn't have got him under that circumstance, or at least not very easily. They gave away the farm, but they needed a big name. They needed a game-changing kind of name. their problem was that they just can't keep him in there. They just let him go box. And I think that was the part that really kind of undid them. I don't think that the money that they paid him per se is that what's really breaking their bank? Is that what's really holding them back? I don't think that it is. And how many reported it as some sort of massive shift in momentum for PFL? It was a big deal that an organization outside the UFC could take a free agent from a guy who was able to take advantage of a contractual clause that the UFC used to keep guys under lock and key. And he was able to use the free market, such as it existed, to boost his profile and boost his fortunes. He was able to bet on himself and win. Like, that is a story of note. Also, his biography is quite remarkable. So like this, it is a triumphant story. And again, not one that necessarily serves the PFL's bottom line in terms of the cost. There is some inefficiencies that way, but UFC has signed plenty of guys that were not worth the cost that they ended up paying for them. I could think of several that ended up like being a bit of a disaster in that regard. Is it really something for this dude to slight the MMA? Excuse me. He's talking about Sean O'Connell here. It is really something for this dude to slight the MMA media, who had been more than generous with their coverage of the crap product he is involved with. I'll agree with that. LFA has more viewers, more people in the arena, and better fights, but gets a fraction of the coverage PFL gets. And this fellow wants even more, but they have less relevant fighters, so that's not quite a fair comparison. It's the same argument that Combate makes. Combate is like, oh, we get more viewers. Yeah, but you don't have relevant fighters near the top 15, top 25 even. So that's like, I'm sorry, but PFL does. That's at least presumed anyway. And there's more reason to believe that. PFL pissed away the goodwill of media and fans. I'll agree with that. It is over. I'll agree with that. Well, for the most part anyway. They are done. They may limp along for years to come. There are endless suckers in the investment world, but they get done. Now, there's a bit of a follow-up on this one. I mean, I half agree with what Ant's saying. It's just I think he's being a little bit overly aggressive with it. Oops, excuse me. There is a second component to this, which is, I can't get to it, but understand something. Like, the UFC plays this game, and they played this game. They don't do it anymore, but they used to play this game a lot. So what they would do is they'd be like, why is the MMA media focusing on these bullshit fighters and these bullshit organizations only for them to then, in most cases, try and sign those guys and then brag about their roster? Let me give you a million examples of this. When Brock Lesnar fought in K1, Dana was texting Sherdog and Josh Gross about how dare you go to those shows? What the fuck is all of this about? And then, of course, what happens after that fight? They signed Brock Lesnar. Now, that show was a silly-ass show, but it made sense if you have reporters in LA to go and spend time covering it. Hello, Brock Lesnar is worth that. Like, I don't think that's in any way really debatable. And you could go on the list from this. How about Ben Askren? There's a video that came out, again, on Sherdog of Dana on the phone being like, and why are you covering this curly-headed fuck, blah, 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 only for them to then trade to go get them? You know, Strikeforce doesn't have anybody good. Then they went and they fucking bought the whole goddamn roster, and which, by the way, when they came over, it fucking ended up demolishing several of their established names at that time. WEC was a little bit more hand in glove, and they ended up getting rid of Steve Cantwell and at 170 and up, and they brought over Carlos Condit and whatnot, and then they brought over Brian Stan and stuff like that. But that was really to just acquire the lower divisions. But even at 155, again, there was not as much. With WEC was one of the ones where it felt like the UFC kind of put their arm around them in a different way, so it was less hostile. But certainly, I can name any number of different guys that they couldn't believe that the MMA media would cover them, only for the UFC to then sign them, only then for the UFC to then brag that they had these guys and look how good our roster is. So, I could certainly understand the arguments that the PFL is their own worst enemy and that they have absolutely benefited from coverage that, that the MMA media did not need to give to them. But I just don't think it's true that like the MMA media has just been constant. I believe that having worked at these institutions, if anything, they've been somewhat hostile to their prospects and to what they actually represent in the market. And if you talk to the folks who work at those places or worked at them, I think they would agree with that. Also, Ant is a fire starter. Let's just be honest about that. I love you, though. Kevin says, what business metric do you think the current UFC is optimizing for? Pay-per-view buys? Probably not. Increased lifetime value per customer? I don't know. I don't know what metrics they're looking for. It's a great question. I don't know. I mean, contracted revenue is a big one. Tourism boards is a big one. But that's not like, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. It's a good question. Willie says, BC is an amazingly smooth broadcaster. Yes, he is. He's living proof that in certain circumstances, you can actually polish a turd. It's a little mean, but I know what you mean. Carnage says, MK Promotions is live. Who do you sign? Any of the MMA amateurs that send in their videos? Yes. How do you get them started? I don't give a shit. Asking again because you skimmed it last week. Oh, I mean, we're not really doing it. It's not a real thing. I'm saying like in a jokey joke world, it would be like Rough and Ready or something. Rough and Rowdy, whatever it's called. Jeff says, would it be better for Fluffy Hernandez to move down to welterweight? No. Not yet, anyway. He seems undersized for middleweight. We'll see about that. He could be right, but I don't. It seems a little premature to pull that trigger. He's the same size as Usman with a shorter reach, and his aggression style seems like a problem for top welterweights. It could be. It could be. He's got a little bit of loose change on him, a little bit of extra skin and fat, but let's see where he ends up at middleweight before we declare this. Dave Sandine just being a mensch. Thank you, Dave. Blake says, can you summarize? Oh, fuck me. We're doing this? The Israel-Palestine conflict. You seem quite knowledgeable. I know that's probably a big ask. I just want to understand. Dude, this is a big question. I don't want to say I don't want to answer this, but like this is a very big question. The shortest way I can explain this is, as the decline of the Ottoman Empire happened, there was a void in this portion of the geographic territory that was then taken over by colonial powers, and it ended up being handed over despite either promises or who else was living there at the time, and it was created as an expressly, obviously, Jewish state. And there was initially an attempt called the Nakba to kick out the Palestinians. Again, I'm doing the most Cliff Notes version of this imaginable. They ended up settling, part of these people ended up settling into broader Israeli society, but then these two enclaves, well, three enclaves, but really now, I mean, God, now I have to go in the 67 war. But it ends up in a situation where it was initially three, now down to two territories, Gaza and West Bank, and these are territories that are under military occupation. And so the question is what you want to do about them, and it looks like what they're trying to. I mean, this is the worst explanation ever. This is such a long question. I don't know how to answer it without like going into long-winded rants. But you're in a situation where essentially a colonial state created another colonial state. And there was a population that was already living there. Partly they thought that they were entitled to this land. Partly they had been given assurances that it would be given to them, and it wasn't. And now you have these, again, many of them integrated into Israeli society. That is true. But then you have these other enclaves. Initially there were three. Now we're down to two, and we're going to be down to one here pretty soon because they're just going to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And or at least they're probably going to do that, right? And then what happens? And in these territories that are under military occupation, well, it's military occupation. They're deeply unequal. They are, subjected to any number of different. I mean, so these are apartheid. This is essentially like the what's called Greater Israel, which includes these territories. This is just flat out apartheid. That's not me saying that. That's Human Rights Watch saying that. That's Amnesty International, and that's the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem also saying the exact same thing. So that's take that for what it is worth. And so you just have this situation between people who had been there during the decline of the Ottoman Empire and who felt like they were entitled to a state who didn't get one, and then you have post-World War II happens, and they wanted to create a place after obviously the Holocaust, a place safe for Jews, and they created a Jewish state. But they didn't really countenance the needs of the Palestinians who were there at the time, questioning even if the notion of did a Palestine ever really exist if it was never a formal nation state, similar to the Kurds. And they never really, the short answer on us is they never really solved the problem. They never really dealt with Palestinian needs of sovereignty. And that leads us to our present conflict. It just went unresolved. There's much more to that where, you have the 1967 war, where they were able to claim greater swaths of territory and push out a bunch of Arab armies. And, you know, this changed the debate around what the Palestinian national efforts, what they consider the demarcation line of their territory and whatnot. It's a very complicated debate, but in short, there was a space that was under Ottoman occupation, and then British, and not just British, but British colonial occupation. It's more than that, but they were part of it. And they just decided in post-World War II, essentially, to just, you know, after the Holocaust, to use that for a haven for Jews to escape persecution, which I think, you know, any reasonable person can understand, but you then still have to account into the needs of the Palestinians. And I would submit to you that they simply did not. So that is the worst explanation you're ever going to hear, but it's the shortest one that I can give. Daniel says, have you had a chance to see No Other Land yet? No, not yet. Not yet. That's the documentary about Palestinians under siege in the West Bank. Johnny says, is the LT brand as strong if you're not going against insulting the minority fan opinion? I don't know what that means. Which minority fan opinion? And I'm not doing a bit. Like, I'm not exactly. You mean like being a contrarian? I'm not sure how to answer that. If you could clarify, you don't have to put another donation in, but if you could clarify, Othello will put it back up. Connor says, I'm an amateur kickboxing champion. However, working full-time and being a husband, how do I balance fight camps and training with having a healthy marriage and making enough money to train? You probably don't, is the answer. Unless you're really good or you can get really good very quickly, the answer is you probably don't. Sounds harsh, but it's the reality. If you're really good at fist fighting, you can make a good living, and you can make a good living, relatively speaking, quickly. It obviously doesn't happen quickly, but in the scope of how long it could take versus not being that way, it can happen very fast. But if you're already like at a place where you're a husband and a dad and you're not a high-level pro, you probably have some rethinking to do. Sydney says, was there ever an explanation for why Jason Perillo closed his gym? Not that I'm aware of. Is he still coaching individual fighters? I think so, but not the other way around, or not the other way. Otter says, is there actually a professional path to becoming an MMA analyst? Does it require a journalistic background? No. And are there analyst-specific roles in MMA? Only ones you can create for yourself. That's it. Guys, if you want to do anything, you have to imagine, in MMA, you have to imagine what that is, and then you have to create that world around you. Like, there's no other way to do it. So you have to just imagine, okay, what is it I want to do? What does that look like day to day? And what are the steps I need to take to create that world around me? That's it. Those are the only relevant questions. There's nothing else. If Alex wins the rematch, will the UFC finally make a super fight with Alex versus the winner of John and Tom? They seem to be running out of star power without him and the inactivity of the other champions. I suspect you will see him at heavyweight one way or the other. Yes. Bobby says, considering the fact that Bisping only ever lost to TRT and PED users, do you think you can make a case that he's the second best middleweight of all time? No. I mean, a very, 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 very important figure in the middleweight division, a very extremely important figure in the history of UK MMA, but you are who you beat. And I recognize that there are some other circumstances, but we have no idea to what extent that's affected other champions in the sport as well. His case is like a little more, there's enough stark contrast to draw some of these lines, but you know, no, no, it's not enough. Again, he had a fucking great career. Please don't misunderstand me, but no. TJ, what would have been the effect on the star power of Ilia had he won a title defense at Bernabeu versus a Spanish-speaking opponent, i.e. Lopez or Rodriguez? Well, his star power in Spain already appears to be high. I don't think, that would have obviously sent it into overdrive too, but it's already pretty big there. The question is, like, what would that do in the United States? I don't know if it would do that. I mean, it would be big, but it wouldn't be like game-changing in the United States. He needs something that's game-changing here, or if they want to really expand into Spain, yes, that would be a great conduit. But like, you know what I mean? If you're really trying to be a pay-per-view star, you got to get big in North America. It's just the reality. Matt, welcome to the party. Sean, did you ever watch Elephant Graveyard's review of Rogan's last special? If you did, what did you think? If not, you really should. It's absolutely hilarious. All the best from Ireland. I don't think I've seen it. I've certainly not seen Rogan's special either. I don't know if I've seen Elephant Graveyard's thing on that, but I'll take that into account. Clout, shout out from Cleveland. I'm a huge movie guy and love your appreciation of Arnold's movies. What's his most underrated to you? I think he's killer in Kindergarten Cop. Bitches, it's Running Man. Running Man, which was originally a Stephen King book, which I read, and it's very, very different than the movie, but Running Man. The Running Man is such a fucking awesome movie, and it doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Luke, if I've read about 120 classics since COVID, and I have to ask, have you read Master and Margarita? For my money, the best book of the last 100 years. I have not. There's a lot I haven't read. Michael says, as an Iowa City resident, great to hear you liked it here. Super small and interconnected martial arts community in Iowa, and I'm glad we didn't disappoint. Man, I gotta say, I don't sometimes these Midwest countries, these Midwest states, I don't know what to think of, especially ones. I've been to Des Moines, but I've never been anywhere else. And Des Moines was not overwhelming. Iowa City was great. It's great place. Definitely would go back 100%. Henry says, you've mentioned how pro wrestling is not your thing, but do you have friends and family from your generation who still watch it? No. No, definitely not. I'm 45 and I watch occasionally. The ladies can wrestle a lot better today. Again, I'm not making any commentary about the product. If it's good, it's good. If you like it, you like it. But it's just not for me. Dave says, have you tried cognitive-based therapy for sleep insomnia? No. Studies have shown to be more effective than drugs. I believe that. I believe that. The drugs are effective to a degree, but it's not a perfect solution. I could use a better one. All right. Luke, at 150 milligrams, trazodone starts having an effect on your serotonin and dopamine levels. I've heard anything over 100 milligrams won't help you sleep any better and will start having other pharmacological effects. That's not what my doctor says, but I'll look into it. Aqua says, Luke, you seem to be increasingly aware of your age as you've entered your 40s. Do you have any worries or awareness of a potential midlife crisis? Yeah, fucking of course. Of course. I mean, guys, I had a major career, what do you want to say, interruption, change, earthquake, right as like I had a kid, and the sports themselves are changing. Boxing has changed a lot with the Saudi takeover, and more than that, and MMA has certainly changed an enormous amount. Like all these factors hit at once. So I probably have been living through a midlife crisis, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, that's probably exactly what has happened to me. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm absolutely certain that's what has happened. Now, I've not gone and done something stupid like buy a sports car, but it was a lot to process. Big R says, Conor McGregor speaking at the White House about illegal immigration is ridiculous. He's literally a foreign national who committed a crime while in the U.S. He hasn't been convicted of a crime in the U.S. I can certainly say that. Well, okay, yeah, he did. You're right. The chucking the dollar at the bus thing. Shouldn't he be getting deported? Okay. I don't know if he needs to be deported, but, I've been reading, this is going to sound kind of silly, but it's true. I've been reading about the philosophy. What do different philosophers in different forms of philosophy, ethical philosophy, continental philosophy, you name it, what do they have to say about the nature of impunity, personal impunity, and where it comes from? And, Nietzsche has spoken about this, but he's hardly the only one. And one of the lessons I've been learning from this about the nature of impunity and where it comes from is the great philosophers of the world that I have read about it. They seem to believe, again, it's all a little bit different depending on the focus, but one of the common through lines that tends to appear is that impunity in their mind comes from a gradual moral rot. That what happens is people who don't properly wrestle with their conscience or extinguish the flame of their conscience. There can be key moments where they kill it, but in general, it has to happen in a way where it takes time, and then they lose the ability to. They don't just exercise impunity, but then they lose the ability to actually ever engage in any kind of real self-reflection. Then everything after that becomes some kind of transactionalism. What does the situation get me or not? What does it do for me? What does it not? And it, like, that kind of gradual moral rot ending in this kind of impunity over, I'm just going to do what I want to do. Like, to me, that perfectly describes the journey of Conor McGregor. It's not like people think like, what he's doing now reveals like who he's always been. And I'm like, I don't know if that's totally true. I think there probably was a portion in his life where he may have been a bad actor on some level, but he did probably wrestle with it at some point. But that stopped somewhere along the way and was ignored along the way and was eventually, I think, stamped out along the way. And now his capacity for it has been not just diminished, but erased. And so now all that's left is impunity. And that is his story as best I can tell. Sleeto, welcome to the party. Lord of the Pies. You're right about Loopy. Johnny says, what would be a bigger bang for my buck? YouTube membership to your channel or your Substack? That's up to you. I want to join the Substack, but I don't know about paying for both. Yeah, you don't like. It's really up to you. It's a question of like what you want to get. If you want to just stick to the core suite of things here on YouTube, then just do that. If you want the expanded universe of the kinds of things we discuss on the live chat and then beyond, take it to Substack. Diet says, related to your point about not sticking the landing, a lot of that is the 401k hoax. We were tricked into accepting 401ks as a replacement to pensions. Yep, my dad had a pension. And he's had in terms of the financial side, a comfortable retirement. But I checked my 401k this morning at around 11, and, bloodbath. Fucking bloodbath. And I've been diligent about saving, Brian says, is welterweight the most fun division right now? It's taking a turn. How would you match him up? Shav, JDM, Gary Bilal, Brady, Buckley, Proches, Usman, Burns, Morales, Leon, Islam, Screw Colby. I'm also not like, I have nothing against Kamaru Usman at all, but I don't think he's like some key contributor to welterweight anymore. People keep bringing him up like, oh, what about all the fights you can make with him? I'm much more interested in, obviously Bilal's the champion, but the young guys, Shavkat, Buckley, JDM, Gary, did I say Sean Brady yet? Like the reason why welterweight is exciting is because you have young guns coming up. That's why. It's there's, and we had talked about like you didn't get the turnover at lightweight that we thought we were going to get. Well, you're getting it at welterweight. Young guns. Is BC still using age? I can't even get into this. Y'all ask him. I thought Trump's tariff fetish was a destructive waste of time until learning about the 10% tariff on the Heard and McDonald Islands, which are barren wastelands only inhabited by penguins. Yeah, 10%. I don't even know what to say about that fucking shit, man. Oh my god. It's a bad one. What's the latest? Has Trump relinquished them yet? Probably not, right? Probably not. Oh, here we go. Trump says tariffs plan is going, quote, well, end quote, as markets have worst days since 2020. Oh, fuck, bro. Oh, my God. I don't even know where to start with that. Again, there's nothing. There's people who will get on here. Anytime I say anything critical of Trump, like there's two responses from his fans. One is, "Oh, you have TDS," and the other people are like, "Oh yeah, we love that he did those things." Like the TDS folks are like, "Oh, he doesn't do those things. You have TDS," and then the other half are like, "Oh, we love that he does those things." And like the fact that this never seems to dawn on them is like evidence that I'm apparently the one who has TDS. I don't even know. I don't even know where to start with any of this. Like, coming up with the formula as like basically trade deficit divided by imports, or exports versus imports, divided by imports, is like the most nonsensical nothing. Like, mathematically, I don't even know what that is supposed to mean. It doesn't mean anything. And if you can find an economist who doesn't work for the White House, like literally even another conservative economist who can make sense of that, I would love to see it. I haven't been able to find it. And I actually follow a couple of conservative economists, and they were all like, we don't really know what this means. It doesn't mean anything. It's quite bizarre. That's one problem. Another problem is, like, I don't even know what they're trying to do. Like, Nike has 155 factories in Vietnam. Is the hope that they'll move some of that back? But if you're Nike, you might be waiting for the tariffs to end, because Trump will just, or dial them back, or, wait them out, and then the next administration just ends. Like, you can't just make that. Like, it would take decades. Like, you can't do it in 2 to 3 years. It would take decades to rebuild those industries here. We're talking about 40, 50 years of manufacturing erosion. A vast set of global tariffs can be punishing, and probably will result in what they call tariff jumping, where part of what happens with tariff jumping or with tariffs is that, the things that, first of all, they have this incredibly inflationary response, which I can't fucking believe that, like, you guys know, I don't miss Biden at all. Like, he's a war criminal who deserves to be tried in The Hague, but like, y'all voted him out because inflation was high, which I understand. Like, I sort of get that. And then we're just going to do this shit. It just blows my mind. But the other part of tariff jumping is that, like, Brazil had tariffs in the 60s and 70s. So like what ended up happening was, like, car manufacturers would come over and then build industries there. But those were like nascent, underdeveloped industries that had never been there, not ones that had been hollowed out. It's a very different process. And like, some of that will happen, but that takes a long time. And, it takes consistent, stable investment, which, Trump is very mercurial. Like, so that's an enormous problem. And also, like, like, who was one of the biggest losers today would be like American tech companies. Nvidia, it turns out, like, some of their stuff is exempted, but like, Apple took a monster hit. And if you think about it, Apple makes a lot of sense in like a globalized economy where, the design work and whatnot takes place here with more advanced, educated labor, and then the kind of nuts and bolts of assembling the phones happens on the supply lines that they have painstakingly created over time in these cheaper markets. Like this, the benefit to the consumers that you get a cheaper iPhone. Like, are they expecting Apple to just rebuild here? Like, again, that would take time. And now your iPhone, a brand new iPhone is what, 14, the iPhone Pro Max is like what, $1,500. It's going to be a lot more than that here. Like, and like, the other part you have to ask yourself is, like, Americans want jobs where they're working and building shoes or clothes in factories here. Like, I am very skeptical of that idea. And also, like, tariffs are supposed to be like narrowed in the sense where, and by the way, they were narrowed in his first term. It's not like tariffs are good or bad. Like, it's like anything else. It's just a tool about how you use it. But just like a blanket tariff, when like what you're supposed to be doing is helping either a special case or underdeveloped industries and like a nurturing economy, so that by the time it's a developed one, it can then compete on the global stage. They're not designed to be permanent, and they're certainly not designed to be like, we're just going to have tariffs everywhere. Like, it's supposed to be like, hey, we're going to protect tariffs around, related to various forms of heavy machinery or farming industry, farming equipment, or auto manufacturers or whoever. They're supposed to be specific around those industries, not just like everything, everyone, all the time on all of it. It's like the most chaotic, nonsensical, economically illiterate way of doing it. And then the point that like you could make is like, oh, well, it's just brinksmanship. Like, he's just threatening to get concessions and then he'll let him go. But like what makes business thrive is stability, that people know you can plan and invest because you have a stable economy and stable economic policies by which that is allowed to grow. And then more to the point, like every currency, not every, but virtually every currency worldwide is up against the dollar. The reason why the United States can sanction other economies is because the world economy is based on the dollar. Like nothing will hasten the emergence of de-dollarization more than this. It's like, I just don't understand what the fucking play is. You're asking Europe to get closer trade ties to Asia. You're asking Africa to get closer trade ties to Asia. And as somebody who has visited South America multiple times a year for the last almost 15 years, dude, I can tell you that Chinese manufacturing has a very visible presence in that country. I know lots of people who are Colombian entrepreneurs who spend half their year in Colombia, for example, and then the rest of the half of the year in Guangzhou, or name some kind of other manufacturing hub over there. You can buy Huawei phones. Dude, Huawei sponsors a local Colombian soccer team, the Santa Fe. Like there's a huge footprint. You're just going to create more of that as you de-dollarize the world economy, which means then all the forms of sanctioning power, which by the way is a complicated topic, but like now you lose that leverage, which now means like your only real mechanism is some other kind of hard battle, like literally like warfare over any kind of dispute. You have really nothing else. You have no other mechanism by which to go with in that point. Like, there are people who are watching this who are going to be like, we don't care about your opinion. It doesn't matter. We trust him much more than you. Yeah, fine. There's nothing I can say to you. There's nothing. There's absolutely not a goddamn thing I can say. And I fully am cognizant of this. I am totally aware. I'm not one of these people that just believes that, all we need is a little bit of economic hardship and people are going to change their minds. And I think that's a little bit simplistic. But I think until we do get a little bit of hardship, it's going to be impossible to have this conversation. Again, the funniest thing in the world is that the people who are aggressive in calling others or accusing others of having Trump derangement syndrome, these are people that have a religious connection to this man, who cannot under any circumstance fathom what a good faith critique of him looks like, because there isn't one. Like, they're the ones who are deranged because they're the only ones who cannot have any argument about the merits of his policies other than they're just good. And why are they good? Because they come from him. There's no other way to have this argument. And like, that's just not the real world. We live in the real world. Look at the fucking market. We're deporting people to the government is admitting that we sent a guy to a gulag in El Salvador based on an administrative error. They're admitting it. I know JD Vance is tweeting the opposite, but that's what the government documents, the court documents say. We're sending scholars home on revoking visas because they, by the way, I read the op-ed that the Fulbright scholar wrote in for Tufts University. They accused her of having pro-Hamas activity. She doesn't even mention Hamas in the op-ed. It's about asking the Tufts University that if you guys are going to, if you had divested from apartheid South Africa, there needs to be a commitment to keeping those principles in place as it relates to Israel. But there's no mention of Hamas at all. It doesn't exist. And we're to say nothing of Khalil Mahmoud and everything else. Like, we're having our civil liberties challenged here, and it's green card holders, it's visa holders for now. But now there's this move to like denaturalize citizens, or at least like there's rumblings of it, which is just fucking mind-boggling to me. Meanwhile, we're just crashing the economy and heading into a recession that is absolutely avoidable under any other definition. And if I have the temerity to notice these things, I have derangement syndrome. Okay. I don't know what to tell you. Luke, how do you see Craig Jones versus Gable Steveson going? I have not heard what the rule set is. So probably Craig, but it depends on the rule set. What current light heavyweight do you think stands the best chance against a prime John? Current light heavyweight? None of them. I guess Yuri would be the closest, but none of them. Like, none of them would be close. He smokes them all. Henry, true or false? Lopez stops Volk. True. Chandler stops Pimblett. False. Merab beats O'Malley again. True. Jones retires before fighting Aspinall. I'm going to say false because I don't want bad karma on this. McGregor never fights in MMA again. True. Netflix buys the rights for Canelo Crawford. True. Look, I asked this a while ago, but with the MAGA UFC connection being in the spotlight, would you ever bring Felix from Chapo back on the show or potentially go on Chapo? Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Banana says, would love to hear your take on the Artie and Dembo death at TCL after the league hit a horrific training KO he suffered 9 days prior to his final fight. Yeah, this is not new information. And the commission was asked about it, and they were like, yeah, there's nothing to see here. I don't know what can be done about it. Apparently TCL had, or I think, I got to be careful about this. I think either did know or at least should have known by following proper procedure. Like there's some gap in terms of that. And he ends up fucking dying as tragic death. And then there were questions that were put before the commission. And then the commission was like, nothing to see here. Like, there's nothing we can do. It is what it is. It's like, dude, you fight in Florida, man. You are literally taking your life into your own hands. Truly, truly, I mean that. I don't know what can be done about it. I don't know what can be done about it, but something needs to be done about it. I know Mike Russell's on the case. I hope something can come of it, but I don't know. I honestly don't even know what legal mechanisms are available anymore. Luke, did the rough divorce from your childhood ever make you swear off getting married and having kids when you were younger, or was it always something you wanted? Kids, yes, that was accidental. For a long part of my life, I didn't want them, and then that changed when I got older. But not marriage, no. But definitely kids. I was like, yeah, I don't know about that shit. But then, life takes you in a different direction, right? Luke, have you actually read any credible literature on avoiding? I have not. I have not read credible literature on this. So, good question. Movie Wreck, 1997's Cure by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. Okay, duly noted. Alan says, I asked BC this question. At some point, if the characters and the industry does not ply the effort in caring about fighter pay, how much attention and care can you give at this point? Diminishing amount. Diminishing. I've kind of, I'm not going to say I've had it. It still will be relevant in certain ways. It does tend to define certain business practices. We have to acknowledge it. But like going to the mat for it, that's dead to me. I won't do that again. I won't make that mistake twice. For Othman for dealing with the degenerates here. All right. I'll send the $20 to Othello. Joe, have you ever been surprised by a coach continuing to work with a fighter after a controversy? I've been surprised by John Kavanaugh's recent support. No. I'm not the least bit surprised by him or anybody else doing it. At first I was like, wow, especially after John had his issue in Las Vegas where, he's alleged to have done terrible things to his significant other, and none of his coaches, I guess one did, Mike Winklejohn, but like none of the other ones stopped working with him. That was surprising to me at first, but now I'm like, right, they just that's they can speak for themselves. I don't know how they feel about it, but it tells you like what that coach fighter relationship is principally about, right? Disney World, okay. Luke, since this is your personal channel, can you tell us what the DMs you guys couldn't show on Friday's show were? Absolutely fucking not. I just cannot do that. For Jones versus DC2, Cormier was 38. How does that fight go if it was 37-year-old Jones and 38-year-old DC? Different. I think DC could win that one. Does heavyweight versus lightweight matter in that matchup? Oh, you mean light heavyweight, you mean? It would make a difference, but I don't know if Cormier was really all that better at heavyweight. I actually think he was better at light. Would you consider interviewing more people in the fitness space? Yes. I know Mike came with baggage, which I didn't handle all that great, but I'd be interested to hear you talk to other science-based bodybuilders. Yep, working on some stuff. Stay tuned. Do you think Sean's being underestimated? Merab tends to get more dominant in later rounds due to his cardio, but Sean didn't seem gassed. He also had Merab at the clock looking at that teep. I think there's enough reason to think that things could go differently next time. And I'm curious to see how it goes. But if that doesn't go well, then like I'm not, it's over at that point. He wouldn't even answer that question about trans sports, even though hundreds of medals have been awarded to biological men who claim to be women and could be. I didn't answer the question because the guy had a fucked up name that I didn't want to give any other attention to. I think that there's a lot of people. This is the issue of trans people in sports. I think is a sport by sport answer. So, folks, you guys remember Fallon Fox, and so there's a question of like, should there be trans fighters in MMA? I have not seen compelling evidence that there should be, but I'm not an expert on the literature around this. Ross Tucker is a South African sports scientist. He is not a right wing psycho. However, he is firmly kind of against it. I think I'm going to take the position now, having not, I don't really this is not an issue I have studied even a little bit, because I'll just be honest. I think people who are obsessed with this at the expense of like what's happening with the like civil liberties, health and human services, firing the people who are in charge of making sure that poor people can access heating and cooling in the winter or the summer, and any other number of like vastly more important issues versus the literal handful of trans athletes in college competing. There was another case in powerlifting. It did not make sense to me to allow it, but a couple of things I would say. One, I want to see someone show me what their humanity looks like before I even listen to them on this issue. Like the vast majority of what is animating this is just people engaging in some kind of trans panic and then expecting everyone else to go along with it and be like, what the fuck, you don't like that? If there is a sports science argument to make for keeping them distinct, which there does appear to be, I'm willing to hear that one. No problem. Fine. In combat sports, I have not seen a compelling argument that there should be any kind of allowance for it. But science is emerging. We shall see how it goes over time. What I'm not going to fucking do is let people who don't give a shit about women's sports, certainly are engaging in just absolute, how do I say this, who don't give a fuck about anything other than engaging in some kind of bizarre trans panic at the expense of vastly more important issues that billions of people are potentially subject to. Yes, I'm going to focus my time and resources on it. That's why I don't really talk about it. I don't really have a strong opinion about it to the extent that I've ever seen any academic literature about it. It seems to indicate that for now, keeping them out of their following the prescriptions of what Ross Tucker says seems to be the most prudent given what we understand about the situation. But what I'm absolutely not gonna fucking do here is let people engage in ridiculous dehumanization as some kind of hobby horse for like, we're gonna stand up for the rights of women. Get the fuck out of here. The people who are doing that don't give a shit about them, don't give a shit about their sports. It is nothing other than an attack on marginalized people, using that as a conduit because it's kind of the lowest hanging fruit that they can go to. And so, again, some of the sports science arguments, to the best that I understand them, appear to support some of these bans in certain cases, or at least caution at a bare minimum. But the people who are peddling this shit are fucking, for the most part, absolutely untrustworthy, fucking pathetic losers. So let me just be as clear about that as I possibly can be. I will follow the science and what the experts say. Ross Tucker appears to think it's not a good idea. Okay, fine. For now, let's see how it goes. But get the fuck out of here with this. Like, this is the most important issue facing America. Of the top 100 issues facing America, this isn't even on the goddamn list. It's not even on the list. I can list vastly more important ones than this very quickly. Two simple and unrelated questions. What is the meaning of life? Try to live as happy in existence as you can. What is your favorite conspiracy theory? I don't have any. Since pay-per-view buys are down, shouldn't champs ask for a percentage of the gate instead? Yeah, they're not going to get it. They're not going to get it. Yeah. For Jones versus DC, okay, we did this one already. If Jayon Silva runs over and beats Bryce Mitchell, should a main event be next for him? And if so, who should it be? Fight night main event, maybe. Let's see what happens with the winner of Pitbull and Yair, or the loser of that one. Could be an interesting one there. How does one get into soccer? Start watching it and realize it's a fantastic sport. I don't know. That's all. I got into it from the World Cup. Well, yeah. I got into it from the World Cup years and years and years ago, and just kind of went from there. It was a slow start, slow burn, but it's just an amazing sport. When you got to realize is like the worldwide participatory rate for it is so high that you get an extraordinary amount of like athletic talent. It's just incredible how good the premium product is. Luke, hope you and the fam are doing well. I had a chance to go see the cherry blossoms with the baby girl. They're in full bloom now. Abrazos, mi estimado. I didn't even bother going this year because I landed back on Saturday when it was the peak bloom. It took forever to get home from the airport there because I landed at Reagan or what National Airport and had to come through 395 to get back over it, which you have to pass. You have to go through that area to get home. It took forever to get there. We kind of went over this one. Did you end up giving your... I haven't finished, guys. That last week kicked my ass. I had no time. I got up an interview with Fred Lambert on the future of Tesla. He's the editor-in-chief of Electrek, and he helped me like navigate where Tesla is and everything. And that was a piece I had to get up for the Substack. And then I had to do the fights. And then I had to come home and like get ready for MK on Monday. And it's been a lot. Liam says, I'm going to Phuket, Thailand at the end of the month. Ooh, have fun with that. I will train for 2 months. Hell yeah. Your breakdowns always help me with Fight IQ. Thank you. Dude, let us know how it is. Take pictures. Let us know. Ray says, did your alcoholism period significantly affect your cognition and memory at the time? Yes. Currently been on 8 days, and it's been quite hazy. Yeah. I think it permanently fucked up some of my recall memory. It's somewhat improved since I stopped regularly using, but I think I did permanent damage. I mean that quite sincerely. Do you think the UFC would have had a better chance of making John versus Tom had they scrapped the Stipe fight? Yeah, yes. It's hard to say exactly how much better, but I do think that they would have had a better shot. Yes, they waited and they fucked around, and now here we are. In my opinion, he doesn't have the balls to keep the tariffs. But the problem is, it's just the unpredictability of it all. They're here one day, they're gone the next. They're this amount one day, they're back the next. And by the way, like, where's Congress in all of this? Congress is supposed to be the one that has the ability to control this very particular kind of policy action. It's just, I'm just hoping to survive this. I don't know, the next 4, however long this fucking lasts. That's it. That's my only goal, is just to surf. Try not to fall off the board, man. Napoleon Blown Apart has an incredible video on McGregor and his downfall from a few years ago. While due for an update, Napoleon is also from Dublin. Ooh, I got to check that out. I've heard good things about him. Luke, what is with the state of the heavyweight division? What's your thoughts on someone like Jailton Almeida with his elite grappling skills? Heavyweight title, he's too lopsided. He obviously has very good grappling skills and he's very athletic, but he doesn't have enough, even in a diminished heavyweight field, to win the title. Noah says, super random, but I'm interested to know your thoughts. What do you think the dumbest group of conspiracy theorists are? I personally would have to go with the Space is Fake Club. I don't even know about these fucking conspiracy theories. I mean, when I grew up, it was like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and did we land on the moon? What are they saying these days? Space isn't real. The Earth is flat. Jesus, man. Like, something came out of COVID. Like, again, not all of us. All of us have had our worldview to some extent revised one way or the other, but there's a certain kind of contrarianism that came out. It was like, oh, we don't trust these experts anymore. But it wasn't just about them. It's like there's a certain kind of person that just doesn't trust expertise generally, right? I don't trust financial experts. I don't trust legal experts. I don't trust military experts. I mean, anything, any kind of expertise almost seems like not real to them anymore. Like, the notion of expertise seems not real. And I think these are people that are, like, frankly, dangerous for society. Luke, do you think a simple systems for the ref to deduct a point could be if a fighter does the same foul twice, point taken straight away? Yes. Or a combination of any 3 fouls? Yes. Love it. Totally think that'd be a welcome idea. Absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying it has to be this way, but if this was one policy that they took up, I'd be cool with it. Blake says, appreciate the response. Trying to educate myself on the issue. It seems messed up what's happening to Palestinians. Seems Israel has all the power. Well, very simple question. Who is occupying who? Which people have a real army? This is people want to make this to be like a very difficult moral situation to understand. It's actually quite simple. One entity is up here and another one is down there. And the one that's up here doesn't want the one that's down there to be there anymore. But what do you do about that? And what are you allowed to do about that? And how should we feel about that? But it's not really all that complicated. They want to make it complicated. Oh, the Palestinians turned down all these great deals. All bullshit. Total bullshit. Not true. Not true at all. There's one group up here. There's one group that is, at the top and that has a state and that has massive state support from the most powerful military on earth. And there's another group that has none of that, has no state, has no standing army, has no real ability to protect itself, which is why they're getting slaughtered in Gaza. And I'm supposed to feel like I can't really decide like how this should, how I should feel about this. It's not what the solution should end up being is a matter of debate. But like who is morally culpable in this particular conflict is not, yes, there's plenty to go around. That's true. It's not one or the other. It's not only in one case. But in terms of understanding what is driving this conflict, it is literally this power asymmetry. That is what is driving this conflict. I'll believe he'll just roll back the tariffs and proclaim victory in a few weeks in spite of no major concessions. I hope you're right. Luke, if you had to create a Mount Rushmore for each major non-UFC org, Pride, Strikeforce, Bellator, who would be the fighters you select for each promotion? For Pride, it would definitely be, I guess it could be Sakuraba, but I might pick Fedor. For Strikeforce, I mean, you might go Ronda with that one. Bellator, Patricio. WEC, Aldo. Did you see my Jim Lampley fan submission? I don't know if I saw that one. I'll ask Mikey. I don't know if I saw that one. Sydney says, if a Democratic president is elected, will it be possible for them to bring back all the positions that were dismissed by the Trump administration? I don't even know. I mean, some of it, yes, some of it could be brought back by administrative fiat, but I think a lot of it is kind of baked in, some of this damage. I don't know. I don't know how that would work. It's a good question. I don't know. Jackhammer, what were the key differences between the Sasai, Islam versus Arman and Brady versus Leon? The setup looks similar with throwing knees in the clinch, but curious how it's done in a grappling setting. Both were meant. I'd have to review the Sasai. I'd have to see the Sasai that Islam and Arman hit to go back and look at that again. I can't say off the top of my head, but they're all pretty similar. It's just a foot sweep. It's like you take not the instep, but the inside of the foot, and then when the other when the weight is somewhat lifted and turned and off balance, and then you kick it out and then sweep through, and there's nothing blocking the other side. That's kind of how it goes. But I'd have to review it. I can't do it off memory. Have you read into Scott Payne? Started reading his book. Now he's on JRE. I've not. I don't know who that is. I'll hopefully fight 1 to 2 times. Yeah, let us know. That's sick, bro. Good luck. Have fun. Are you familiar with Dr. John Campbell's videos? I am not. Is he some kind of COVID conspiracy theorist? I don't know. I don't know who he is. All right, boys and girls. I have to do a submission radio interview, so I'm out of here. Thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Thumbs up if you haven't. Subscribe if you haven't. Thanks to all who watched. Thanks to all who subscribed. Thanks to all who donated. Thanks to everyone who was here. Big thanks to Othello as well. MK tomorrow at 11. We'll get you ready for the weekend, and we're out of here. So until next time, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you then. Stay frosty. Bye.